A bullet tears through the windshield 2 inches from her skull, and the only man standing between Sienna Vale and a grave is the same man who helped build the empire that destroyed her family. Lucien Moretti doesn't flinch. He fires back into the dark and drags her beneath the dashboard with hands still wet from her father's blood money. This is a story about loyalty that rots from the inside, love that burns where it shouldn't, and the price you pay when every choice you make is the wrong one. Stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came in sideways that night, the kind of cold October rain that doesn't just fall, it punishes. It hit the pavement on West 47th Street like 1,000 tiny fists and turned the gutters into black rivers that swallowed cigarette butts and dead leaves whole. Manhattan was drowning in it. The cabs moved slow. The people moved slower. And somewhere between the neon blur of Times Square and the rotting silence of Hell's Kitchen, a woman who hadn't set foot in this part of the city in 6 years stood outside a door she'd sworn on her mother's memory she would never open again. Sienna Vale was 24 years old, 5'7", and soaked to the bone. Her leather jacket hung heavy on her shoulders. Water dripped from the ends of her dark hair and ran down the bridge of her nose. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, hadn't slept in 2 days. The hospital bill folded inside her back pocket was already soft from the rain, $211,000 and climbing. Stage 4. Inoperable. The doctors said it with their hands clasped like they were delivering a sermon, and Sienna had sat in that plastic chair and felt absolutely nothing, because feeling something would have meant she still believed the universe owed her father a fair shot. It didn't. Vincent Vale had been a lot of things in his life. Dock union enforcer, underground bookkeeper, a man whose handshake once meant more than a federal contract. But right now, hooked up to machines in a room that smelled like antiseptic and slow death, he was just a 58-year-old man whose lungs were full of tumors and whose daughter couldn't afford to keep the lights on in his hospital room past Friday. Sienna had tried everything. She'd called banks, she'd called the union, she'd called cousins she hadn't spoken to since her mother's funeral, and every single one of them had either hung up or pretended the call dropped. Nobody wanted anything to do with the Vale name. Not anymore. That name carried too much weight, and the kind of weight it carried didn't come with sympathy cards. So now she was here, standing outside a matte black door beneath a faded brass awning on a street with no sign, no number, and no welcome. The alcove. She'd heard about this place when she was 17, whispered about it the way people whispered about war zones and haunted buildings. It was Lucien Moretti's personal sanctuary, a jazz club on the surface, something far worse underneath. The kind of place where men in $4,000 suits decided who lived and who didn't over bourbon and Coltrane. And if you walked in uninvited, you didn't walk out the same. Sienna pushed the door open anyway. The hallway inside was narrow, low ceiling, exposed brick that had been painted black so many times the layers had turned into something almost organic, like the walls themselves had grown skin. A single amber bulb hung at the far end, swinging gently from the bass vibration of a live saxophone somewhere deeper in the building. The air smelled like old wood, cigar smoke, and expensive leather. 2 men stood at the end of the hallway. Big. Still. The kind of still that comes from years of knowing exactly how fast they could move if they needed to. One of them had a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to the corner of his mouth. The other one had no expression at all, which was somehow worse. "I'm here to see Lucien," Sienna said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. The scarred one looked at her like she was a stain on the floor. "Nobody sees Lucien. Tell him it's Sienna Vale." Something shifted behind the man's eyes. Not much. Just enough to tell her the name still meant something in these walls, even if it meant something ugly. He didn't move. He just stared at her for a long time, water pooling at her feet, her chest rising and falling with the kind of controlled breathing you learn when you grow up in a house where showing fear was the fastest way to get hurt. Then the other one, the expressionless one, turned and disappeared through a side door without a word. 2 minutes passed. Maybe 3. Sienna counted her own heartbeats because counting was better than thinking, and thinking right now meant confronting the fact that she was about to beg a man she despised for money to save a father who'd spent most of her childhood lying to her. The door opened again. "Follow me." The club opened up like a wound behind the hallway, wider than she expected, darker than she remembered. A stage in the far corner where a saxophonist played something slow and devastating to an audience of maybe 15 people scattered across leather booths and candlelit tables. The ceiling was high here, exposed ductwork and iron beams, and the smoke from a dozen cigars drifted upward like spirits leaving bodies. And there in the booth farthest from the stage, partially hidden in shadow and candlelight, sat Lucian Moretti. I was 46 now. She did the math without meaning to. 46 years old and still built like something carved from granite and bad decisions. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered, threaded with silver at the temples. His jaw was sharper. His eyes, those cold, almost colorless gray eyes, hadn't changed at all. They still looked like they could read your entire history in a single glance and decide in half a second whether you were worth the oxygen. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie. The top button of his shirt was undone. There was a glass of something dark in front of him, untouched. And beside the glass, a phone that hadn't rung in the 20 minutes he'd been sitting there because the people who called Lucian Moretti didn't call. They waited until he called them. When he saw Sienna walking toward him through the amber haze, something happened to his face that she couldn't quite name. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't warmth. It was more like watching a crack form across ice, fast, silent, and dangerous. He remembered her. Of course he did. He remembered the scrawny 13-year-old with scraped knees and two big sneakers who used to sit on the fire escape of her father's Red Hook apartment, reading paperback novels, while Vincent and Lucian argued strategy in the kitchen below. He remembered carrying her on his shoulders at the 4th of July cookout in '08, back when the world was simpler and loyalty still meant something that didn't end in a body bag. He remembered the last time he'd seen her, 16 years old, standing in a courthouse hallway with red eyes and clenched fists, watching him walk past in handcuffs while photographers screamed his name. She hadn't looked at him that day. She was looking at him now. "Sit down," Lucian said. His voice was lower than she remembered, rougher, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Sienna slid into the booth across from him. Water from her jacket left a dark streak across the leather seat. She didn't apologize for it. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks. I tried." A beat of silence. The saxophone moaned in the background. Lucian studied her face with the kind of focused attention that made people confess things they hadn't planned to say, and Sienna forced herself to hold his gaze because looking away now would mean she'd already lost. "How bad is it?" he asked. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "He's got weeks, maybe less." Lucian's jaw tightened, just barely. If she hadn't been watching for it, she would have missed it entirely. "And you came to me." "I came to the only person who still picks up when his name shows on caller ID." "That's not an answer." $211,000, Sienna said flatly. "That's the answer. His insurance lapsed 3 years ago. The union pension got eaten by lawyers after the RICO indictments. I've been paying what I can from bartending shifts, but the hospital's already talking about transferring him to a state facility uptown where the survival rate makes a coin flip look generous." She paused. Her throat was tight, but her eyes were dry. "I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because my father is dying in a room that smells like bleach and failure, and you owe him." Lucian didn't blink. "I don't owe anyone anything." "You owe him everything. He took a 7-year sentence so your name stayed clean. You know it. I know it. The whole damn waterfront knows it. Your father made his choices. And you made yours. You walked out of that courtroom and built a kingdom on his silence." Sienna leaned forward. The candle between them flickered and threw shadows across her face that made her look older than she was. Harder. "I'm not asking for a favor, Lucian. I'm collecting a debt." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Lucian lifted his glass, took a slow sip, set it down without breaking eye contact. "You always did have your mother's mouth," he said quietly. Something twisted in Sienna's chest, sharp and unexpected, like a wire snapping under tension. She hadn't heard anyone mention her mother in years. Not since the funeral. Not since the closed casket, and the rain, and the 17-year-old girl who stood at the edge of a grave and decided that grief was just another form of weakness she couldn't afford. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't talk about her. Not here. Not to me." Lucian held up one hand, a small, careful gesture. "Fine." He set the glass down. I'll take care of the medical bills." Sienna hadn't expected him to agree that fast. She'd prepared arguments, threats. A whole speech about loyalty and betrayal and the moral bankruptcy of men who get rich off other people's sacrifice. She had none of that now. Just a hollow ringing in her ears and a tightness behind her ribs that felt dangerously close to gratitude. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. There's always a catch with you." "Not this time." Lucian's gray eyes found hers through the smoke, and for just a second, half a second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with money or debt or dying fathers. Something electric and wrong and terrifying in a way that made her stomach drop. She stood up too fast. The booth creaked. "We shouldn't do this," she whispered. Lucian's expression didn't change, but his hand, the one resting on the table, curled slowly into a fist. "Do what?" he asked. But they both knew. She left without answering, walked back through the amber haze and the narrow hallway and the matte black door and out into the punishing rain. And she didn't stop walking until she was 3 blocks away, with her hands shaking and her pulse screaming and the taste of something she couldn't name burning on the back of her tongue. Behind her in the booth, Lucien Moretti sat perfectly still for a very long time. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. "The Veil girl," he said. "I want a detail on her. 24 hours. Nobody gets close." He hung up before the person on the other end could respond. Then he finished his drink alone, staring at the wet streak her jacket had left on the leather seat across from him, and for the first time in years, Lucien Moretti felt something he couldn't control, and that terrified him more than any bullet ever had. 3 days passed. Sienna spent them the way she spent most of her days now, split between the hospital and a cramped studio apartment in Astoria that she shared with a radiator that didn't work and a window that didn't close all the way. She worked the late shift at a bar in the East Village. She took the subway at 2 a.m. with pepper spray in her pocket and exhaustion behind her eyes. She sat beside her father's bed during the day and watched his chest rise and fall with a mechanical rhythm that sounded nothing like breathing. Vincent was awake sometimes, lucid even. On those days he'd look at her with those watery brown eyes, the same eyes she'd inherited, the same eyes that used to go hard and flat when business came knocking. And he'd try to talk about the old days, about her mother, about things she didn't want to hear and he probably shouldn't have been saying. "You went to see him," Vincent said on Tuesday. Sienna looked up from the crossword puzzle she'd been pretending to solve. "What?" "Lucien, you went to see him. I can tell." A cough rattled through his chest. He gripped the bed rail until his knuckles turned white. "What did he say?" "He's covering the bills." Vincent closed his eyes. Something complicated moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or shame, or some ugly combination of both. "He's a good man. He's a criminal." "So was I." "Yeah, you were." Sienna put the crossword down. "And look where it got you." The silence between them was heavy and familiar. They'd been building this wall between them for years, brick by brick, argument by argument, and neither one of them knew how to take it down without bringing the whole thing crashing onto their heads. "Sienna, don't. Listen to me." "I said don't." Her voice cracked. She hadn't meant for it to crack, and the sound of it, thin, brittle, like stepping on ice, made her jaw clench so hard her teeth ached. "I came back for you. I'm here. That's enough. Don't ask me to be grateful to the man who—" She stopped. Vincent watched her, waiting. "Just rest," she said. "Please." He did, or pretended to. His eyes closed and his breathing steadied, and after a while the machines took over the conversation with their steady beeping, and Sienna sat there in the plastic chair with her hands folded in her lap, and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was leaving the hospital that night, Thursday, around 11, when it happened. The parking garage beneath the hospital was the kind of concrete nightmare that made you walk faster, whether you had a reason to or not. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, half of them dead or flickering. The air smelled like exhaust fumes and old water. Her boots echoed on the concrete as she walked toward the stairwell, keys in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't see the van. It came from behind, fast, silent, except for the soft screech of tires on painted concrete. Black. No plates. Windows tinted so dark they looked solid. It pulled alongside her and the side door slid open, and for one frozen second Sienna saw 2 men in ski masks reaching for her. She ran, not toward the stairwell. Too far. She ran sideways, cutting between parked cars, ducking low, her boots slipping on oil-slick concrete. Behind her, she heard the van door slam shut and tires scream as it reversed to cut her off. Sienna vaulted over the hood of a sedan, hit the ground hard, rolled. The impact sent her phone skittering across the floor and pain shot through her left shoulder, but she was already moving again, scrambling toward a fire exit she'd spotted 10 feet ahead. She hit the door with both hands. It flew open. Cold air hit her face. She was outside. At dumpsters. Rain. She ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, and she was 6 blocks away on a street she didn't recognize, crouched behind a delivery truck with blood on her palms from where she'd scraped them on the concrete, and her entire body vibrating with adrenaline and something older than adrenaline, something primal and furious and absolutely terrified. Her phone was gone. Her jacket was torn. And someone had just tried to take her. She found a payphone 2 blocks later, one of the last ones in the city, a relic bolted to a wall outside a shuttered bodega. She picked up the receiver with shaking hands, dialed the only number she'd memorized besides her father's. The line clicked twice. "Yeah," Lucian's voice said. "Someone just tried to grab me." Her voice was steady. "Barely." Parking garage. St. Marcus Hospital. Black van, no plates, 2 men in masks. 3 seconds of silence. "Where are you now?" "Corner of..." She looked up, squinting through the rain. 10th and 40-something. I lost my phone. I can't..." "Stop moving. Don't hang up. I'm sending someone." "Lucian. 4 minutes." I was right. It was exactly 4 minutes. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled to the curb, and a man the size of a refrigerator stepped out and said her name. Not asked, said like it was a fact, and opened the back door without waiting for her response. Sienna got in because the alternative was standing in the rain waiting for the van to find her again. 40 minutes later, she was standing in the middle of a penthouse on the 62nd floor of a building she didn't know existed, staring at a skyline that looked like it had been designed to make everything below it feel small and insignificant. Lucian arrived 20 minutes after she did. He came through the door without knocking because it was his door, his building, his floor. And the first thing Sienna noticed was that his suit jacket was gone, and the sleeves of his white shirt were rolled to the elbow, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Scraped up. Nothing broken." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands, turned them over, examined the raw, bleeding skin on her palms with a focus that was almost clinical. His fingers were warm, steady, the kind of hands that had done terrible things and gentle things in equal measure, and the contradiction of that made her skin prickle. "I need to know everything," he said. "Every detail. What time? How many men? What they said? If they said anything." "They didn't say anything. They just reached." "Did they follow you from the hospital, or were they waiting?" "Waiting, I think. The van was already there when I came down." Lucien let go of her hands, stepped back, pulled his phone from his pocket and made 3 calls in rapid succession, each one shorter and colder than the last. The third one ended with a sentence that made the hair on the back of Sienna's neck stand up. "Find out who they work for. I don't care how." He hung up, looked at her. "You're staying here," he said. "Excuse me?" "This building has 24-hour armed security, biometric locks on every floor, and 3 separate exit routes that don't show up on any blueprint. You're safer here than anywhere else in the city." "I have an apartment." "Your apartment has a window that doesn't lock and a front door a teenager could kick in. I had someone check." Sienna felt the anger rise like bile. "You had someone check my apartment?" "I had someone check everything about you the night you walked into my club. Where you live, where you work, what train you take, who you talk to." His voice was flat, unapologetic. "That's how this works. That's how you stay alive. That's how a stalker works. Call it whatever you want. You're still alive to call it something." They stared at each other across the penthouse living room, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the city glittering 62 stories below like a circuit board on fire. And Sienna felt the ground shifting beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the building's height. She was in his world now, not visiting, not passing through, in it. "This is temporary," she said. "Agreed." "I mean it, Lucien. I don't belong here." Something crossed his face, quick and unreadable. "Nobody does." He showed her the guest suite. Private bathroom, king bed, windows facing east toward the river. Clean towels. A change of clothes already laid out, her size, because of course he'd had someone check that too. Get some sleep, he said from the doorway. Tomorrow we figure out who wants you dead and why. I don't know why. Lucian paused. His hand rested on the doorframe, and the light from the hallway behind him carved his profile into something sharp and almost sculptural. Your father does, he said quietly. And then he was gone. Sienna stood in the guest suite of a penthouse she didn't ask for, wearing a dead expression over a living terror, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that the most dangerous man in New York had just looked at her like she was the most dangerous thing in his. She didn't sleep that night, neither did he. At 4 a.m., Sienna found him in the kitchen. No jacket, no tie, just the wrinkled white shirt and a cup of black coffee, going cold in his hands. He was standing at the counter, staring at nothing. The penthouse was silent except for the rain and the distant hum of a city that never fully shuts up. Can't sleep? She asked. Don't sleep much anymore, he said without turning. She poured herself coffee from the pot, stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island. 3 feet of marble between them. Might as well have been 3 inches. Why are you doing this? She asked. The real reason. Lucian finally looked at her. In the blue-gray light of pre-dawn Manhattan, his face was all angles and shadows, and something she couldn't quite define. Exhaustion, maybe, or the particular kind of loneliness that comes from spending 20 years surrounded by people who are afraid of you. Because I owe your father, he said. You said you don't owe anyone. I lied. Sienna almost smiled, almost. First honest thing you've said to me. Won't be the last. The rain softened. The kitchen was quiet. Steam curled from their cups in twin spirals that twisted together before disappearing into the dark air above them. He's dying, Lucian, she said. And this time her voice did something she hated. It broke. Just a little. Just enough. He's dying and someone tried to grab me and I don't know why. And I'm standing in the kitchen of a man who... She stopped, set the cup down hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. Lucian didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched her with those gray eyes that saw everything and gave away nothing, and the silence stretched between them like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Who what? He asked softly. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Past the reputation and the violence and the years of distance, down to whatever was underneath, if anything was underneath at all. Who scares me more than the men in that van? She whispered. Lucian's hand tightened around his coffee cup. His knuckles went white. Good, he said. You should be scared. Of you? Of everything that happens next. Outside, the rain stopped. Dawn crept across the skyline like a slow wound opening, painting the clouds in shades of bruise and blood. And somewhere across the river, in a warehouse that didn't exist on any map, a man named Matteo Corsini picked up a phone and said 5 words that would change everything. She doesn't have it yet. The morning after the attempted abduction, Lucian made a call that Sienna wasn't supposed to hear. She'd been standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, barefoot on cold marble, wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too big that someone had left folded on the guest bed. She'd come out for water, nothing more. But when she heard his voice, low, controlled, the kind of quiet that men use when they're trying very hard not to yell, she stopped. I don't care what it costs. I want the garage footage pulled, every camera in a 6-block radius, and I want names by tonight. A pause. Then make them talk faster. Sienna pressed her back against the wall. Her pulse ticked in her throat. And Matteo? Lucian said. The name landed like the stone dropped into still water. She didn't know it, not yet. But something about the way Lucian said it, careful, almost surgical, the way a man says the name of something he's been circling for years, made her skin go cold. Keep eyes on him. Don't engage. I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, who he calls. Everything. He hung up. Sienna counted to 5, then walked into the kitchen like she hadn't heard a word. Lucian was standing at the counter, phone face down, both hands gripping the edge of the marble like he was trying to keep the floor from shifting. He looked up when she entered. His eyes did that thing again. The quick, total scan, head to bare feet and back, cataloging damage the way a mechanic checks an engine after a wreck. Who's Matteo? She asked. His face didn't change. Nobody you need to worry about. I just got chased through a parking garage by men in ski masks. I think I get to worry about whoever I want. Lucian pushed off the counter, rolled his shoulders. She noticed the tension in his neck, the way his jaw sat slightly forward, locked tight. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the bruised skin beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his left hand that he hid by shoving it into his pocket. Matteo Corsini, he said finally. My second in command. Has been for close to 15 years. And you think he sent the van? I don't think anything yet. I'm asking questions. Lucien. I said I don't think anything yet. His voice sharpened. Not loud. Lucien never got loud, she was starting to realize. He got quieter. The anger didn't rise in him. It dropped, sinking into something deeper and harder and far more dangerous than shouting. When I know, you'll know. Until then, eat something. There's food in the fridge. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said, eat something. Sienna opened her mouth to fire back, then closed it. Not because she was afraid, because she recognized the look on his face. The exhausted, barely held together expression of someone who was managing 15 emergencies at once and didn't have the bandwidth for a 16th. She'd seen that look on her father's face 100 times growing up, usually right before he disappeared for 3 days without explanation. She opened the fridge, found eggs, started cracking them into a pan she found under the counter. For 5 minutes, neither of them spoke. Sienna cooked. Lucien stood by the window and watched the city wake up. Delivery trucks crawling through wet streets, steam rising from subway grates, the whole mechanical beast of Manhattan grinding back to life beneath a sky the color of dirty aluminum. I need to see my father today, she said. I'll have someone drive you. I don't want someone driving me. I want to take the train like a normal person. You stopped being a normal person the second someone put a grab team on you in a hospital garage. Lucien turned from the window. A car will take you. Armed detail. 2 men inside, 1 outside the room, non-negotiable. This is insane. This is Tuesday. She almost laughed. The absurdity of it, standing in a billionaire mobster's kitchen scrambling eggs while discussing her armed security detail, hit her like a wave, and something between a laugh and a groan escaped her throat before she could stop it. Lucien watched her, and for just a second the mask slipped. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. The memory of a man who used to know how to smile before the world beat it out of him. Then it was gone. Eat, he said. Car leaves in 40 minutes. He walked out of the kitchen, and Sienna stood there with a spatula in her hand and eggs burning in the pan, and her heart doing something complicated and stupid that she absolutely did not have time for. The hospital was different in daylight, brighter, more sterile, more honest about what it was, a place where people came to either get fixed or finish dying, and the fluorescent lights didn't let you pretend otherwise. Vincent was awake when she walked in, more awake than he'd been in days. He was sitting slightly upright, the bed cranked to a 45-degree angle, and his eyes tracked her the moment she stepped through the door with a sharpness that belonged to the man he used to be rather than the one he'd become. You look different, he said. Different how? Scared. Sienna pulled the plastic chair closer, sat down, folded her hands in her lap the way she always did when she was trying to hold herself together. Someone tried to grab me last night, in the garage downstairs. Vincent's monitors beeped. His heart rate ticked up. She could see it on the screen, the green line jumping, spiking, then slowly settling. His hand found the bed rail and gripped it hard. Where are you now? He asked. Where did you go? Lucien's. He moved me into one of his buildings. Armed security. The whole package. Vincent closed his eyes, let out a breath that rattled through his chest like wind through a broken window. Good. Good? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Sienna? I want you to tell me why. Why someone sent a van full of men to kidnap your daughter from a hospital parking garage. What did you do? What did you take? What are they looking for? The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Louder than the monitors, louder than the ventilation system humming overhead. Vincent lay there with his eyes closed and his lips pressed thin and his fingers still white-knuckling the bed rail, and Sienna watched him the way she'd been watching him her entire life, with love and fury in equal measure, neither one winning. Dad, there's a ledger, he said. The word sat between them like an unexploded bomb. What kind of ledger? The kind that gets people killed. Vincent opened his eyes. They were wet. Not from tears, from something deeper, something structural, like the foundation of a building finally giving way after decades of invisible rot. Names, dates, account numbers. Every dirty dollar that flowed through the organization for 20 years. Politicians, judges, federal agents, cartel connections, all of it. Documented, organized, hidden. And hidden where? Somewhere safe. Dad. Hidden where? Somewhere you don't need to know about yet. Sienna stood up. The chair scraped against the linoleum with a sound like tearing fabric. Are you kidding me right now? People are trying to grab me off the street and you're still playing games? I'm not playing games, I'm protecting you. You've been protecting me my whole life, and look where we are. You're dying in a hospital bed, and I'm sleeping in a gangster's penthouse. Your protection is what got us here. The words hit harder than she meant them to. She could see it in the way Vincent's face crumbled. Not dramatically, not like in movies, but in the small way that real faces break. A twitch around the mouth, a slight collapse of the eyebrows, the subtle loosening of skin around the eyes that comes when someone stops holding themselves together. Your mother, he said. Sienna went still. What about her? The ledger. It's not just about money. There's something in it about what happened to her. The room tilted. Not physically, but something inside Sienna's head shifted, and for a moment the fluorescent light seemed to pulse, and the monitors seemed to beep out of rhythm, and the floor beneath her feet felt like it was made of something much less solid than tile. Mom died in a robbery, she said. The words came out automatic, rehearsed, the same way she'd been saying them since she was 4 years old. A botched convenience store holdup. Wrong place, wrong time. That's what you told me. That's what the police report said. Vincent looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was the look of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, leaning forward, deciding whether to jump or step back, and knowing that both choices lead somewhere terrible. The police report was wrong, he said. What do you mean the police report was wrong? I mean it was written by people who were paid to write it a certain way. Sienna's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. Say it. Whatever you're about to say, just say it. Not here. Vincent's eyes flicked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. Not in this room. Not with these walls. Dad, the piano bench, he said. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. In the old apartment. Red Hook. The one I never let you touch when you were little. You remember? I remember. That's where it is. Don't go alone. Don't tell anyone, not even Lucien. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible from a man with stage 4 cancer and failing lungs. His grip was iron. His eyes were fire. Promise me, Sienna, not Lucien, not yet. Not until you've read it. Why not Lucien? Because there are things in that ledger that will change what you think about him, about all of us. And I need you to see the truth with clear eyes before anyone has a chance to explain it away. Sienna stared at her father, the man who'd lied to her for 20 years, the man who'd hidden the truth about her mother's death inside a piano bench in a Red Hook apartment while she grew up believing in wrong place, wrong time. She pulled her wrist free. I'll go, she said, alone. I heard you. She turned and walked toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when Vincent spoke again. Weaker now, the burst of strength already fading, his voice dissolving back into the papery rasp of a man whose body was shutting down one system at a time. Sienna. She stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. She walked out without answering. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded, in the silence of that hallway, like the locking of a vault. Back at the penthouse, the afternoon dragged like a knife across glass. Sienna sat in the guest suite with the door locked, staring at the ceiling, turning her father's words over and over in her mind, like stones in a tumbler. The police report was wrong. The piano bench. Don't tell Lucien. Why not Lucien? What could possibly be in that ledger that would change how she saw the man who was currently spending a fortune to keep her alive? At 6 o'clock, she heard voices in the main living area. Low, tense. She pressed her ear to the door and caught fragments. Lucien and someone else, a voice she didn't recognize. Male, younger, aggressive. Can't keep running surveillance without results. The crew is getting restless. The crew gets what the crew gets. I didn't ask for opinions. You asked for loyalty. Loyalty costs, Lucien, especially when nobody knows what we're protecting or why. You're protecting her because I told you to protect her. And that's enough? A girl nobody's seen in 6 years walks back in, and suddenly the whole operation shifts to babysitting duty? A silence. Long enough that Sienna's breath fogged the wood of the door. Say that again. Lucien's voice was barely audible, which meant it was at its most dangerous. Call it babysitting duty one more time. I didn't mean get out. Lucien, now. Footsteps. The front door opened and closed, then nothing. Sienna waited 5 minutes before opening her door. She found Lucien on the balcony despite the cold, leaning against the railing with his forearms crossed and his head bowed. The wind pulled at his shirt. 62 floors below, traffic crawled through streets that looked like veins carrying the city's blood from one dying organ to the next. She stepped outside. The cold bit her skin immediately. How much of that did you hear? He asked without looking up. Enough. Then you know my people aren't happy about this arrangement. Are you? He finally looked at her. The wind had pushed his hair across his forehead, and in the fading daylight, with the city burning orange and gold behind him, he looked less like a crime boss and more like what he actually was. A tired man carrying more weight than his frame was built for. Happy isn't the word I'd use, he said. What word would you use? Committed. Sienna leaned against the railing beside him, close enough that their elbows almost touched. The wind was freezing, but neither of them moved inside. My father told me something today, she said carefully. About my mother. Lucien's body changed. It was subtle. A tightening of the shoulders, a slight shift in his breathing, the almost invisible clenching of his jaw. But she was standing close enough to feel it, the way the air around him seemed to compress and harden. What did he say? That the police report about her death was fabricated, that someone paid to have it written a certain way. Lucien didn't respond. He stared out at the skyline with those gray eyes that reflected the city lights like frozen water, and the silence between them stretched thin and taut, vibrating with everything neither of them was saying. Did you know? Sienna asked. Know what? That my mother's death wasn't a random robbery. The question hung in the air between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Lucien's hands gripped the railing. His knuckles went white, then slowly, deliberately, released. I knew something wasn't right, he said. Vincent changed after it happened. Not just grief, something else. Something heavier. He started pulling away from the organization, hiding things, making moves I couldn't track. I thought it was paranoia. Loss does that to people. He paused. I didn't ask enough questions. Why not? Because I was 26 years old and too busy building an empire to notice my best friend was drowning. The honesty of it caught her off guard. She'd expected deflection, a non-answer, the practiced verbal judo that men in his position used to avoid accountability. Instead, he'd handed her something raw and unflattering and true, and she didn't know what to do with it. He told me not to tell you, she said. Lucien turned his head, looked at her. About what? About where the ledger is. The temperature between them dropped 10 degrees. Not from the wind. Vincent told you where the ledger is, Lucien said slowly. He told me where to find it, and he told me not to tell you. Not yet, not until I've read it. Lucien's expression was unreadable. She watched his face the way you watch a locked door, knowing something's behind it, unable to tell whether it's salvation or catastrophe. And you're telling me this anyway, he said. I'm telling you he told me not to. I'm not telling you where it is. Sienna, no. She pushed off the railing, turned to face him fully. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and she didn't bother pushing it back. My father has lied to me for 20 years. You've been lying to me since I walked into that club. Everyone in this world lies about everything all the time, and the one thing I can do right now is follow the only instructions my dying father has ever given me that might actually mean something. You don't know what's in that ledger. Neither do you. Or do you? The question was a grenade with the pin pulled. She could see it land, could see the impact ripple across his face in micro-expressions that would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't standing close enough to count the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. No, he said, I don't. She didn't believe him, not entirely, and the fact that she could see him registering her disbelief and choosing not to fight it told her something important about the kind of man Lucien Moretti really was. He wasn't the type to argue when he knew the ground beneath him was uncertain. He'd wait, watch, let the truth surface on its own schedule, then deal with it when it arrived. That patience was either his greatest strength or the most dangerous thing about him. I'm going to find it, she said, alone, like he asked. That's not happening. It's not your decision. Someone tried to grab you 48 hours ago. You're not going anywhere alone. Then follow me from a distance. Put your men on the street. Do whatever you need to do. But I walk in alone and I read it alone. That's the deal. Lucian stared at her for a long time. The city hummed far below them. A helicopter crossed the river in the distance, its spotlight cutting through the darkness like a searching eye. You're just like him, he said quietly. Stubborn enough to get yourself killed. Maybe, but at least I'll know why. She went inside, closed the balcony door behind her, and stood in the living room with her heart hammering against her ribs and her father's words burning in her skull like a brand. Don't tell Lucian. Not until you've read it. 2 days later, Sienna went to Red Hook. Lucian kept his word, sort of. 2 armed men in a black sedan parked outside the building. A third on foot, walking the block in a slow, deliberate loop. They stayed outside. She went in alone. The apartment was exactly as she remembered, and nothing like she remembered at the same time. Smaller, darker. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling. The kitchen faucet dripped with a rhythm she could feel in her teeth. The whole place smelled like dust and trapped time, decades of cooking grease and cigarette smoke, and the particular musty sweetness of rooms that haven't been opened in years. She found the piano bench in the back room. An old upright that hadn't been tuned since the Clinton administration. Its keys yellowed and its wood scarred with water rings and the ghost impressions of 100 coffee mugs. She'd tried to play it once, when she was 9. Vincent had grabbed her wrist so hard she'd bruised. Don't touch that. He'd never explained why. Now she knew. She flipped the bench over. The bottom was lined with felt, old, moth-eaten, loose at the edges. She pulled it back. A manila envelope, taped flat against the wood with industrial adhesive that had yellowed with age. Her name wasn't on it. Nobody's name was on it. Just a plain envelope, thick with paper, sealed with packing tape that crackled when she peeled it open. Inside, a leather-bound book, no bigger than a paperback novel. Handwritten pages. Columns of numbers, names, dates. Account routing codes. Initials cross-referenced with dollar amounts that made her stomach turn. She flipped through the pages with shaking hands, not understanding half of what she was reading, but understanding enough. Enough to know that this wasn't just a ledger. It was a confession, a map, a weapon. And then she found the page. It was near the back. Different handwriting than the rest. Her father's. She recognized the cramped, left-slanted letters, the way he pressed too hard with the pen so the ink bled through to the other side. The entry was dated 20 years ago. November 14th, the night her mother died. She read it once, then again. Then a third time, slower, her lips moving over the words in silence, her vision blurring at the edges as the room seemed to shrink around her until there was nothing in the world except the page and the words and the truth they contained. Operation ordered by MC. Target, Elena Vale. Purpose, eliminate Vincent's stability. Create internal chaos. Blame redirected to rival faction. Paid officers filed false robbery report. Contact, Datine Hargrove, 71st Precinct. Payment, $85,000. Routed through Cayman Shell. Vincent knows. Vincent is keeping silence to protect S and prevent war with LM's inner circle. MC, Matteo Corsini. Lucian's second in command. The man who had been standing at Lucian's right hand for 15 years had ordered the murder of her mother, and her father had known, and had buried the truth to protect Sienna from a war that would have torn the organization apart and put both her and Lucian in the crosshairs. Her father had chosen silence over justice. He had watched his wife's killer shake hands with Lucian at dinner tables and strategy meetings and holiday gatherings for 2 decades. He had swallowed that poison every single day and let it rot him from the inside out, and now he was dying in a hospital bed with tumors in his lungs and the truth taped to the bottom of a piano bench in a Red Hook apartment that smelled like dead flowers and regret. Sienna closed the ledger. Her hands had stopped shaking. That scared her more than the shaking had. Something cold and flat had settled behind her eyes. A stillness that felt less like calm and more like the moment before detonation, when the fuse has burned down to nothing and the world holds its breath. She put the ledger in her bag, stood up, walked toward the door. That's when the window at the end of the hallway exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the floor in a glittering wave. A canister bounced off the wall and rolled to a stop at her feet, hissing white gas. Smoke. Tear gas. She couldn't tell. Her eyes burned, her lungs clenched, boots on the fire escape. 2 men, 3. Coming through the shattered window with weapons raised and faces covered, Sienna ran. She hit the front door at full speed, slamming it open with her shoulder, and the hallway outside was dark and narrow, and she could hear more footsteps echoing from the stairwell below, coming up, cutting off the exit. She went up instead. Stairs. 1 flight. 2. Her lungs screaming from the gas, her eyes streaming, the bag with the ledger clutched against her chest like a child holding something irreplaceable. She hit the roof access door and burst into open air, cold, wet, the sky a flat gray ceiling pressing down on the Red Hook skyline. Behind her, the stairwell door slammed open. She could see Lucian's sedan below on the street. One of his men was already out of the car, gun drawn, looking up. But they were 6 stories down and a lifetime away. Her phone, the replacement Lucian had given her, was in her hand. She dialed. "They're here," she gasped. "In the building, roof." 3 seconds of silence on the other end. Then Lucian's voice, hard as iron. "Jump to the next building. The gap is 5 feet. Don't think. Jump." She looked. The adjacent rooftop was there, lower by maybe 4 feet, separated by a narrow alley. 5 feet across. Maybe 6. Below, nothing but concrete and a drop that would kill her. Behind her, the door burst open, and a man in black tactical gear stepped onto the roof. Sienna ran. She hit the edge of the roof at full sprint, planted her foot on the parapet, and launched herself into empty air. For 1 second, one infinite, weightless, screaming second, there was nothing beneath her but gravity and the certainty that she was either going to make it, or she wasn't. She hit the far rooftop hard. Her knees buckled. Her palms tore open on the gravel surface. She rolled, the bag slamming against her hip, and came up gasping on a rooftop that wasn't hers. In a neighborhood that used to be home, with the truth about her mother's murder pressed against her body, and the sound of men shouting behind her. She ran to the far stairwell, down, out, into the street where Lucian's other vehicle, the backup she didn't know existed, was already screeching to the curb with the back door open. She threw herself inside. The car moved before the door was closed. In the back seat, with blood on her hands and gas still burning her eyes, and the ledger clutched against her chest, Sienna Vale sat in silence and understood, with absolute crystalline, devastating clarity, that nothing in her life would ever be the same, because now she knew who killed her mother, and she knew that the man she was falling for had been standing beside the killer for 20 years. And when Lucian's voice came through the car's speaker system, tight, urgent, asking if she was okay, she answered with 3 words that landed between them like a door slamming shut. "We need to talk." The car didn't take her back to the penthouse. Sienna told the driver to pull over 6 blocks from the Red Hook apartment, on a dead stretch of Atlantic Avenue where the streetlights were broken and the only witnesses were stray cats and shuttered storefronts. The driver, a thick-necked man named Dante who hadn't said a single word the entire ride, looked at her in the rearview mirror with an expression that clearly said this wasn't part of the plan. "Miss Vale, Mr. Moretti wants you back at..." "Pull over. I have instructions. And I have a door handle and 2 working legs. Pull over or I open it at 40 miles an hour. Your choice." Dante pulled over. Sienna sat in the back seat for a moment. The leather was warm beneath her. The ledger pressed against her ribs inside the bag, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. Her palms were still bleeding, shallow scrapes from the rooftop gravel, the blood drying in thin lines across her skin like cracks in old paint. Her eyes burned from the gas. Her lungs ached. Every part of her body was telling her to stop, rest, breathe. She opened the bag instead. Under the pale glow of a streetlight filtering through the tinted window, she read the entry again. Then she flipped backward through the ledger, page by page, tracing the initials MC through 2 decades of transactions. Money moving, orders flowing, a pattern so intricate and so deeply embedded in the organization's architecture that dismantling it would be like trying to remove a tumor from a brain without killing the patient. Matteo Corsini hadn't just ordered her mother's murder. He'd been running a shadow operation inside Lucien's empire for 20 years, skimming profits, redirecting shipments, cultivating his own network of loyalists within the ranks. The ledger documented it all. Every payment, every betrayal, every handshake that was really a knife held behind the back. And Lucian didn't know. Or did he? That question was the one that made her hands shake again. Because the ledger was meticulous. Her father had been nothing if not thorough. And nowhere in its pages did Vincent write that Lucian was involved. But nowhere did he write that Lucian was innocent either. There was a gap, a silence where an exoneration should have been. And silence, in Sienna's experience, was never accidental. Her phone buzzed. Lucienne. She let it ring. It buzzed again, and again, and again. 5 calls in 3 minutes. Then a text. Where are you? Then another. Answer your phone. Then a third, just 2 words. Sienna, please. She turned the phone off, shoved it in her pocket, looked at Dante in the rear view. Take me to the hospital, she said. Miss Vale? The hospital. Now, and don't call him. Dante's jaw worked. She could see the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of loyalties, the risk assessment, the very real possibility that disobeying Lucian Moretti would cost him more than a paycheck. But something in Sienna's face must have communicated the kind of resolve that doesn't negotiate, because after a long moment, he put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb without another word. St. Marcus Hospital was quiet at this hour. The hallways had that particular late-night stillness. Not peaceful, just empty, the way a stage is empty between acts. Sienna moved through the corridors with the bag pressed tight against her side and her ruined hands shoved in her jacket pockets, past nurses' stations and supply carts, and the occasional orderly pushing a mop across linoleum that never quite looked clean no matter how many times you washed it. Her father's room was dark except for the monitor screens. The green lines pulsed. The machines hummed. Vincent lay motionless beneath thin white sheets, his chest barely rising, his face sunken in ways that hadn't been visible even 3 days ago. The cancer was accelerating. She could see it, the way his skin had thinned to something almost translucent, the hollows beneath his cheekbones deepening like small graves forming beneath the surface. She pulled the chair close, sat down, put the ledger on the bed beside his hand. I read it, she said. Vincent's eyes opened. Not all the way, just enough. The monitors registered the change, a slight uptick in heart rate, a shift in the oxygen readout. He turned his head toward her with the slow, effortful movement of a man for whom every gesture now cost something. All of it? His voice was barely there. A whisper scraped across sandpaper. All of it. Silence. The machines filled the gap with their steady, indifferent rhythms. Matteo killed Mom, Sienna said. The words came out flat, clinical, like she was reading a police report, which, in a way, she was. A real one, replacing the fake one she'd believed her entire life. He ordered it, paid a detective to file a false report, used a Cayman shell company to launder the payment. And you knew. You've known for 20 years. Vincent's hand found the ledger. His fingers rested on its leather cover the way you'd rest your hand on a coffin lid. Yes, he said. One word. No defense. No explanation. No qualifier. Sienna's jaw clenched so hard she felt it in her temples. Why? Because if I'd told Lucian, he would have killed Matteo. And Matteo had already built enough loyalty within the organization that killing him would have triggered a war. A real war. Bodies in the streets. Federal crackdowns. Everyone connected to the operation would have gone down, including me. Including anyone connected to me. Including me. You were 4 years old, Sienna. 4. And Matteo knew about you. He knew where you went to school. He knew what time I picked you up. He knew the name of your babysitter and the route she took to walk you to the park. Vincent's voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically. Just a small fracture, like a hairline crack in glass. If I moved against him, you were the first person he would have touched. So I buried it. I buried all of it. And I spent the next 20 years keeping you as far away from that world as I possibly could. You kept me away from the truth. I kept you alive. Those aren't the same thing. At 4 years old they are. Sienna stood up, walked to the window. The parking garage was visible from here, the same one where men in masks had tried to grab her 2 nights ago. She stared at it and felt nothing. The fear was gone, replaced by something colder and more permanent, something that sat in the pit of her stomach like a stone and wouldn't move no matter how hard she breathed. Does Lucian know? She asked. About Matteo, about Mom. No. You're sure? If Lucian knew what Matteo did, Matteo would be dead. That's the one thing I've always been sure of. Since breathing rattled. A cough built in his chest, and he held it back with visible effort, his whole body clenching against the convulsion. Lucien loved your mother, not the way he loved me. Different. She was goodness to him, clean. The one person in his orbit who had nothing to do with the life. When she died, something in him closed. I watched it happen. A door shutting, and he never opened it again. Sienna pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, pale, blood still crusted on her palms. Until me, she said quietly. Vincent didn't answer, but the silence said enough. I have to tell him, Sienna said. I know. He'll destroy Matteo. Yes. And Matteo will burn everything down trying to survive. Yes. And people will die. Yes. Vincent's voice was fading. The burst of lucidity was draining from him like water from a cracked vessel. But the ledger, the evidence, if it gets to the right people. Who? Who are the right people, Dad? Everyone in this city is in that ledger. Judges, cops, feds. Who exactly am I supposed to trust with a document that proves half the justice system is owned? Vincent's hand moved across the sheets, found the ledger, pushed it toward the edge of the bed, toward her. There's a server, he said, encrypted. I set it up 12 years ago. Addresses in the back cover. If the ledger's contents are uploaded and distributed simultaneously to every news outlet, every federal oversight office, every independent prosecutor, they can't suppress all of it. They can kill the story in one place, but not 100. That's the failsafe. That was always the plan. Your plan. My last one. Sienna turned from the window, looked at her father, the man who had carried the weight of a murdered wife and a dangerous secret for 2 decades, who had let that weight crush him slowly rather than risk letting it fall on his daughter. She wanted to hate him. Part of her did. But the larger part, the part that remembered being 4 years old and riding on his shoulders through the Red Hook Farmers Market, the part that remembered him teaching her to ride a bike on the waterfront promenade, the part that still flinched every time a machine in this room beeped too loudly. That part understood. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness, but it was a start. Get some rest, she said. Vincent's eyes were already closing. Be careful. Little late for that. She picked up the ledger, put it in the bag, walked to the door. The door. Sienna. She stopped. When you tell Lucien, watch his face, not his words. His face. That's where the truth will be. She left the room. The door closed. The hallway was empty and fluorescent and endless, and Sienna Vale walked through it with a dead woman's justice inside her bag, and a live man's empire about to collapse under the weight of what she carried. She found Lucien at the penthouse. He was not in the kitchen this time, not on the balcony. He was in the main room, standing in the center of it, like a man who'd been pacing for hours and had finally stopped. Not because the pacing was done, but because his body had simply refused to continue. His tie was gone, his collar was open, his sleeves were rolled, and his eyes, when they found hers the moment the elevator doors opened, were something she had never seen in them before. Not anger, not fear, something beyond both. Desperation. 6 hours, he said. His voice was raw, stripped. You were gone for 6 hours and your phone was off, and my men lost visual contact for 23 minutes, and I... He stopped, ran both hands through his hair, turned away, turned back. Don't do that again, he said. Lucien, don't ever do that again. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. Sit down, Lucien. Something in her voice, the flatness of it, the absence of fight, made him stop. He looked at her, really looked, and whatever he saw in her face made the desperation drain out of his expression and something much worse replace it. Dread. He sat on the edge of the couch. Sienna stood in front of him. She unzipped the bag, took out the ledger, held it between them the way you'd hold evidence in a courtroom, at arm's length, facing the accused. This is what my father hid, she said. This is what everyone's been looking for. This is what those men in the parking garage wanted, and what the ones in Red Hook came for tonight. Lucien's eyes locked onto the ledger. His body went still. Not the practiced stillness of a man in control, but the involuntary stillness of an animal that has sensed a predator and doesn't yet know which direction it's coming from. Open it, Sienna said. Page 114. He took the ledger. His hands were steady. She watched them. Watched his fingers on the leather. Watched him flip through pages of his own empire's corruption with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like nausea. He reached page 114. He read it. The room was so quiet she could hear the wind against the windows 62 stories up. She could hear the leather of the couch creak as his body tensed. She could hear his breathing change, the rhythm breaking, stuttering, like an engine misfiring. He read it again. His hands began to shake. Not his fingers, his hands, his whole hands. A tremor that started at the wrists and moved upward through his forearms like a current running through wire. And his face did exactly what her father had told her to watch for. It collapsed. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way. In the real way. The human way. The muscles around his eyes went slack. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His jaw shifted to one side and then back. And something behind his eyes, some structure, some internal architecture that had been holding everything else in place, crumbled. "Matteo," he said. The name came out like a wound. "Matteo ordered the hit on your mother." He wasn't asking. He was reading, processing, but his voice was doing something terrible. It was trying to hold steady and failing, cracking along fault lines that had been there for 20 years and were only now splitting open. He paid. He paid Hargrove. The 71st, 85,000 through a Cayman. Yes. He stopped reading, closed his eyes. His hands pressed the ledger flat against his thighs and his entire body folded forward. Not collapsing, just bending, the way steel bends before it breaks. "Lucien," Sienna said, "how long?" His eyes opened. They were wet. Not crying, just wet, the way eyes get when the body is trying to process something that doesn't fit inside the space allotted for human emotion. How long did Vincent know? 20 years? The sound Lucien made wasn't a word. It was something between a breath and a groan, pulled from somewhere deep in his chest, and it was the most honest sound she'd ever heard him make. "He sat across from me," Lucien said. His voice was different now, slower, each word placed with the careful, deliberate precision of a man walking across a frozen lake and feeling the ice crack with every step. "Vincent sat across from me at 100 meetings, 100 dinners, and Matteo was right there, shaking my hand, calling me brother. And Vincent knew. He knew what that man did to Elena, and he was protecting me. He should have told me, and you would have killed Matteo." "Yes. And Matteo's people would have come for me. I would have protected you. You were 26 years old and building an empire with the man who murdered my mother. Could you have protected me then? Really?" The question landed like a fist. Lucien's jaw clenched. A vein pulsed in his temple. He looked down at the ledger in his hands, at the pages documenting 20 years of betrayal by the man he'd trusted more than anyone except Vincent himself. And she could see the war happening behind his eyes. The rage fighting the logic. The need for violence fighting the knowledge that violence was exactly what Matteo had always counted on. "Where is he now?" Lucien's voice had changed again, colder, flatter. The emotional fracture was sealing itself, and what was emerging from underneath was something Sienna recognized from the stories she'd heard growing up. The Lucien Moretti who had built an empire not through charm or charisma, but through a capacity for focused, patient, annihilating violence that other men couldn't match because they let their anger make them sloppy. Lucien's anger didn't make him sloppy. It made him precise. "I don't know where he is," Sienna said, "but that's not the point. The point is he's been stealing from me for 20 years and he killed the only—" Lucien stopped. His throat worked. "He killed Elena," the way he said her mother's name. Elena. With a softness that contradicted everything else about him in that moment. Everything hard and cold and murderous, told Sienna. Something she hadn't fully understood until now. Her father had been right. Lucien had loved her mother. Not romantically, or maybe a little, in the quiet, buried way that men love the people who make them feel human. Elena Vale had been sunshine in a world of concrete and blood, and Matteo had extinguished her to start a fire he could warm himself by. "The point," Sienna said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "is that my father built a failsafe, encrypted servers, distribution lists, every news outlet, every federal oversight body, every independent prosecutor in the country. If we upload the ledger's content simultaneously, they can't suppress it. Matteo goes down. His network goes down. The corrupt judges, the cops, the politicians, all of it. And me," Lucien said. Sienna didn't flinch. "And you." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of rooms. Lucian looked at her from the couch with the ledger in his shaking hands, and 20 years of betrayal newly carved into the lines of his face. And she stood in front of him with her torn palms and gas-burned eyes, and the truth sitting between them like a blade that cut in both directions. "You're asking me to destroy my own empire," he said. "I'm telling you what the options are. If that ledger goes public, I spend the rest of my life in a federal prison. If it doesn't go public, Mateo keeps operating. He keeps stealing. He keeps killing. And the next time he sends men after me, they won't miss. I can handle Mateo. The way you handled him for 20 years? While he was robbing you blind and murdering people under your roof?" The words were brutal. She meant them to be. She watched them hit, watched Lucian's face tighten, watched his shoulders pull back, watched the shame and the fury collide behind his eyes in a reaction that was almost chemical. "I didn't know," he said. "I believe you." "Then give me time. Let me do this my way, quietly, surgically. Mateo disappears, the ledger stays buried, and my mother's murder stays a robbery gone wrong forever. No, that's not happening. Sienna, my mother's name was Elena Maria Val. She was 31 years old. She was walking home from a night shift at a bakery on Atlantic Avenue, and a man you called brother paid $85,000 to have her shot in the street like a dog. And you want me to bury that so your empire stays standing?" Lucien stood up. The ledger slipped from his lap to the floor. He stepped toward her, one step, close enough that she could see the exact pattern of the broken blood vessels in his eyes, the exact shade of gray darkening toward something almost black. "I want you alive," he said. His voice was barely controlled. "I want you breathing and standing and alive. And if that ledger goes public, Mateo won't just run. He'll burn everything he can reach on the way down. And you are the first thing he'll reach for. Then protect me." "I'm trying." "No, you're negotiating. There's a difference." She bent down, picked up the ledger, held it against her chest. "I'm going to upload this," she said, "with or without your help. The only question is whether you're standing next to me when I do it, or whether I'm doing it alone." Lucian stared at her. The penthouse was silent. 62 stories of glass and steel and empty air surrounded them, and somewhere across the city, Matteo Corsini was sitting in a room making plans that assumed the ledger was still hidden, that Lucian was still loyal, that Sienna Vale was still just a bartender from Astoria who didn't know anything worth knowing. He was wrong about all of it. "There's something else," Lucian said quietly. "Something you need to know before you make this decision." "What?" "Mateo has a meeting scheduled, 3 days from now, a cargo terminal on the Hudson. A deal. Arms, international buy. The kind of transaction that requires half the city's corrupt infrastructure to function. Every dirty cop, every bought judge, every federal agent on his payroll will either be there or connected to someone who is." "How do you know this?" "Because until 10 minutes ago, I was supposed to be there too." The implication settled over her like a cold wave. Lucien had been part of it. Not the betrayal, not the murder, but the machine, the system, the structure that Mateo had weaponized. Lucien had built the engine, and Mateo had stolen the keys. "If you upload the ledger during that meeting," Lucien said, "while every person connected to Mateo's network is in one place or actively running operations, the damage is total. No time to hide. No time to destroy evidence. No time to run." Sienna looked at him. "You're telling me to wait 3 days. I'm telling you that timing is the difference between justice and chaos. And in 3 days? In 3 days, I help you burn it all down." His voice cracked on the word all. "Everything I built, everything I am, all of it." The weight of what he was offering pressed down on both of them. This wasn't a tactical concession. This was a man standing in the wreckage of his own life and choosing to set fire to whatever was left. Because a woman he hadn't been able to stop thinking about since she walked into his club in a soaked leather jacket had asked him to choose between his empire and her mother's justice. "Why?" Sienna asked. Lucien looked at her with eyes that held 20 years of accumulated grief and a fury so deep it had its own gravity. "Because I should have known," he said. "I should have seen it. I should have protected Elena. I should have protected Vincent. I failed everyone who ever mattered to me, and I won't." He stopped. His chest heaved. His hands balled into fists at his sides. "I won't fail you." Sienna stared at him for a long time. The city pulsed beyond the windows. The ledger was warm against her chest. 3 days, she said. 3 days. And then it all comes down. All of it. She turned toward the guest suite, stopped, looked back. Lucien? Yeah. If you're lying to me, if any part of this is a play to protect yourself or your operation, I will upload every page of this ledger from the lobby of the New York Times building. And I will burn your name so deep into the public record that your grandchildren will feel the heat. A ghost of something. Not a smile, not yet, but the shadow of the man who might have smiled in a different life crossed his face. I believe you, he said. She went to the guest room, closed the door, pressed her back against it, and slid to the floor with the ledger in her lap and her bloody hands on her knees, and her heart beating so hard she could taste copper on the back of her tongue. 3 days. In 3 days, she would walk into the most dangerous room in New York City, carrying the one thing that could destroy everyone in it. And somewhere across the river, in a waterfront warehouse lined with weapons crates and surveillance monitors, Matteo Corsini received a phone call from a man inside Lucian's security detail, a man whose loyalty had been quietly purchased 8 years ago for a price listed on page 47 of the same ledger now sitting in Sienna Vale's lap. She has it, the voice said. The ledger. She found it. Matteo set down his glass, adjusted his cufflinks, looked at the wall of monitors showing cargo routes and shipping manifests, and the faces of men who owed him favors they could never repay. And Lucien? He asked. She told him everything he knows about the woman. The silence on Matteo's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Move the timeline up, he said, and get me a team at St. Marcus Hospital. If Vincent Vale is still breathing by morning, we've waited too long. The call ended. The monitors hummed, and the clock that had been ticking since the night Elena Vale was murdered 20 years ago finally began counting down to 0. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Sienna was sitting on the floor of the guest suite with the ledger open across her knees, memorizing server addresses from the back cover, when Lucian's voice erupted from somewhere deep in the penthouse. Not a shout, worse than a shout. A sound like something tearing loose inside a man who never let anything tear. She was on her feet before she knew she was moving. Down the hallway, through the living room, she found him in the kitchen with his phone in one hand and his other hand flat against the counter, fingers splayed, arm locked straight, holding himself upright like a man who'd just taken a bullet and was refusing to acknowledge the whole. When? He said into the phone. One word, flat, dead. She couldn't hear the response, only the silence afterward, which was somehow louder. Lucien hung up. Set the phone on the counter with a precision that frightened her. Too careful, too controlled, the kind of deliberate movement that people make when the alternative is putting their fist through a wall. What happened? Sienna said. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past the counter, past the kitchen, past the walls of the penthouse, and the 62 stories of empty air beneath them. Staring at something she couldn't see and didn't want to. Your father, he said. 2 words. And she knew. She knew before he said anything else, knew from the way his voice collapsed on the second word, like a building folding in on its own foundation, knew from the way her own body suddenly felt hollow, scooped out from the inside, a shell standing in a kitchen at 3 a.m. with no interior left. Power outage at the hospital, Lucian said. His voice was mechanical now, reading facts, delivering information the way you deliver news that will destroy someone, one piece at a time, because the alternative is giving it all at once and watching them shatter. Backup generators failed on the 4th floor, Vincent's floor. Life support went down for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. By the time they got the power back, don't. Sienna, don't say it, but she already knew. She could feel it, a cold certainty spreading through her chest like ice forming across a lake, covering everything, sealing everything beneath a surface that was smooth and hard and utterly without mercy. Her father was dead. Vincent Vale, 58, former Dock Union enforcer, former keeper of secrets, former liar, former protector, former father, dead. 11 minutes of darkness in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and failure, and the machines that had been breathing for him simply stopped, and nobody got there fast enough, and that was it. That was the whole ending. Not a battle, not a sacrifice, just a power outage and a timer and 11 minutes of silence in a room where no one was watching. It wasn't an accident, Sienna said. Lucian finally looked at her. His gray eyes were bloodshot, red-rimmed, the kind of eyes that belonged to a man who was holding back something enormous, with nothing but willpower and the thinnest possible margin of self-control. "No," he said. "It wasn't. Mateo. Mateo." The name hung between them like a blade. Sienna reached for the counter, gripped it. Her knuckles went white and her arms shook, and for one terrible second she thought she was going to scream, open her mouth and let out something raw and primal and ugly that would fill the penthouse and echo off the glass and never fully stop. She could feel it building in her chest, a sound without a name, a grief so hot it was indistinguishable from rage. She didn't scream, she breathed. In, out, the way you breathe when you've decided that survival is a choice and you're making it right now, in this kitchen, with blood still crusted on your palms and your father's killer somewhere out there in the dark city beyond the windows. How did he know? Sienna's voice was steady. It shouldn't have been. How did Mateo know my father was still a threat? How did he know to move tonight? Lucien's jaw shifted. Someone told him. Someone in your operation. Yes, someone close. It has to be. The hospital detail was need to know. 4 of my people. That's it. Then one of your 4 people works for Mateo. Lucien picked up his phone again. Dialed. The line rang twice. Dante, he said, get to the penthouse. Now. He paused. Bring the others. All 3. Tell them I want a full debrief on hospital security rotation for the last 48 hours. Anyone who doesn't show up in 30 minutes is confirming everything I need to know. He hung up. Sienna watched him. The grief was still there. She could feel it pressing against the inside of her rib cage like something trying to break out. But layered on top of it now was something harder, sharper. A clarity that comes only when everything soft has been burned away, and all that's left is the architecture of decision. The meeting on the Hudson, she said. When is it? Tomorrow night. Mateo moved it up. My sources confirmed an hour ago. He accelerated the timeline. Because he knows we have the ledger. Because he knows everything, or close to it. Then we go tonight. The deal isn't happening tonight. His buyers aren't in position until... I don't care about the deal. I care about the servers. My father's encrypted distribution network. If I can get the ledger uploaded before Mateo's meeting starts, every person connected to his operation gets exposed simultaneously. He walks into that cargo terminal thinking he's closing a $1 billion arms deal, and instead he walks into the biggest federal investigation in 20 years. Lucien stared at her. You want to upload the ledger tonight, right now. My father is dead, Lucien. The man I was waiting for permission from is dead. There is nothing left to wait for. If you upload before I can position my people, then position them. You have 20 hours. That's enough. It's not enough. Make it enough. The words cracked through the kitchen like a whip. Sienna's eyes were dry and burning, and her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The weight of a woman who had lost everything she was trying to save and now had nothing left to lose except the truth folded inside a leather-bound book in the next room. Lucien looked at her for a long time. The pre-dawn kitchen was blue and gray and cold around them, and somewhere below, the city was beginning its slow, grinding transition from night to morning, unconscious of the fact that by this time tomorrow, its entire underground economy would be in flames. Okay, he said, tonight. The next 18 hours moved like a controlled demolition, precise, sequential, and violent in ways that wouldn't become visible until the whole structure came down. Lucien worked the phones from a room Sienna wasn't allowed to enter. She could hear his voice through the door, low, constant, interrupted by silences that were somehow worse than the words. He was calling in debts, repositioning assets, pulling men from operations across 3 boroughs and reassigning them to a single objective that he described, in the one fragment she overheard clearly, as a full shutdown. Sienna spent the morning with the ledger and a laptop. Lucien's tech specialist had delivered to the penthouse at 6 a.m. The specialist, a thin, silent woman named Arden, who wore no jewelry and made no eye contact, helped Sienna navigate Vincent's encrypted server architecture. The system was old but solid. Military-grade encryption layered over a distribution network that would simultaneously blast the ledger's contents to 137 separate recipients, news outlets, federal oversight agencies, independent prosecutors, foreign intelligence contacts, and a series of anonymous dead-drop servers that would mirror the data across 17 countries within minutes of the initial upload. Your father built this? Arden asked, the only full sentence she spoke the entire morning. My father was a lot of things, Sienna said. Arden looked at her with an expression that might have been respect. Then she went back to work. By noon, the upload was ready. A single button on a single screen. One click and every name in the ledger would be public knowledge within the hour. Mateo. His network, the judges, the cops, the politicians, the cartel financiers, and Lucien. Sienna stared at the screen. Her finger hovered over the touchpad. The cursor blinked over the upload icon. Lucien's name was on page 12. Not in connection with her mother's murder. He was clean on that count. But the ledger documented his empire in granular detail. Every payment, every territory, every decision that had made him the most powerful criminal in New York for 15 years. Uploading the ledger wouldn't just destroy Mateo, it would destroy Lucien, completely, permanently, the kind of destruction you don't come back from. She pulled her hand back. Not yet. Not until tonight. At 4 p.m., Dante and two of Lucien's other men arrived at the penthouse for the debrief. The fourth man, a compact, muscular operative named Saldano, who'd been assigned to the hospital's interior detail, didn't show. That was answer enough. Find him, Lucien said to Dante. His voice was the temperature of a freezer. Don't bring him to me. Just find out everything he told Mateo and how long he's been talking. Then we'll have a separate conversation. Dante nodded and left. The other two men, hardened professionals who'd been with Lucien for over a decade, stood in the living room with their hands clasped and their faces carefully blank. And Sienna could see the fear behind their composure. Not fear of Mateo, fear of the man standing in front of them, who had just learned that his inner circle had been compromised, and whose response was not rage but a calm so total it felt like the eye of a hurricane. Tonight, Lucien said to them, we take the Hudson Terminal. He laid it out in 30 minutes. Entry points, exit routes, timing. The cargo terminal was a sprawling complex on the west side waterfront. Loading docks, steel container yards, a network of industrial buildings, and covered platforms extending out over the river. Mateo's deal was scheduled for 10 p.m. His buyers, international, well-armed, connected to networks that stretched from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia, would arrive by boat. His security detail would include at least 20 men, plus whatever corrupt federal agents he had on standby. Lucien's plan was not subtle. It was a siege. I want the perimeter locked down by 9:30, he said. Nobody in or out without my authorization. River approach covered from both flanks. I want shooters on the container stacks. Elevated positions, clear sight lines. When the deal starts, we wait. Let them get comfortable. Let the money change hands. And when Mateo is standing in the middle of that terminal with every dirty dollar he's ever touched within arm's reach, he looked at Sienna. We burn it down. At 8 p.m., Sienna changed clothes in the guest suite. Black jeans, black boots, a dark jacket Lucien had provided, lined with something that felt heavier than normal fabric. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. She put the ledger in a waterproof messenger bag strapped across her chest. The laptop was already in the back of Lucien's vehicle, connected to a mobile uplink that Arden had configured to transmit the moment Sienna gave the signal. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, a bruise on her collarbone from the rooftop landing in Red Hook that had turned from purple to a sick greenish yellow. Her hands were bandaged where the gravel had torn the skin. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. She had. She walked out of the guest suite and found Lucien in the main room, dressed in black, checking a handgun with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been doing it since before she was born. He slid the magazine in, racked the slide, holstered it beneath his jacket. Their eyes met. You don't have to come, he said. We've already had this conversation. I'm having it again. And the answer is the same. Lucien crossed the room, stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the leather of his holster and the faint, sharp scent of gunmetal and something underneath. Exhaustion, maybe. Fear. The particular smell of a man who knows he might not survive the next 6 hours. If something goes wrong tonight, then something goes wrong. Sienna, listen to me. If Mateo gets his hands on you, he won't. If he does, he won't. She looked up at him, held his gaze with an intensity that made the air between them hum. Because you won't let him. That's the deal, isn't it? You protect me, I burn it all down. And tomorrow, whatever's left standing, we deal with it then. Lucien raised his hand, slowly, like he was reaching for something fragile and dangerous at the same time. His fingers touched her jaw, just barely. the tips of his fingers against the curve of her chin, tilting her face upward. "When this is over," he said quietly, "if I'm not in handcuffs or a body bag, I need you to know that I would have done this even without the ledger, even without Mateo, even without your father." "Done what?" "Burned it all down. For you." The kiss that followed was not gentle. It was not romantic in the way that word usually means. Soft music, soft lighting, soft focus. It was hard and desperate and tasted like adrenaline and loss. And Lucian's hand moved from her jaw to the back of her neck, and Sienna's fingers gripped the front of his jacket, and they held each other with the ferocity of two people who understood that this might be the last time they held anything. They broke apart, breathing hard. "Let's go," she said. The convoy moved through Manhattan like a dark current. 3 vehicles, headlights off, navigating side streets and back alleys that Lucian's drivers knew better than their own bloodlines. The city slid past the tinted windows in fragments. Neon signs, steam vents, the occasional pedestrian who glanced at the passing black SUVs with the instinctive wariness of someone who recognizes trouble without understanding its shape. Sienna rode in the middle vehicle with Lucian. Neither of them spoke. The ledger pressed against her chest with every breath, and the laptop in the cargo area behind her hummed softly, connected, armed, waiting for a signal. They reached the waterfront at 9:15. The cargo terminal was massive, a half-mile stretch of loading docks, container yards, and industrial platforms jutting out into the black Hudson like broken fingers reaching for New Jersey. Floodlights mounted on tall steel poles cast harsh white circles across wet concrete. Cranes loomed overhead like skeletal giants. The smell of diesel and river water and rust was so thick you could taste it. Lucien's men were already in position. Sienna couldn't see them. That was the point. But Lucien confirmed through his earpiece that the perimeter was locked. Shooters on the container stacks. Teams covering both flanks of the river approach. A boat positioned 200 yards upstream, engines idle, ready to cut off any waterborne escape. "Mateo's people are inside," Lucien said, looking at the central warehouse through a pair of compact binoculars. "I count at least 15. Armed. Plus 4 vehicles on the north dock. Probably his federal contacts. And Mateo? Center of the warehouse. He always takes the center. Likes to feel like the axis everything spins around." Sienna looked at the warehouse. Its massive sliding doors were partially open, spilling yellow light onto the wet dock. She could see movement inside. Shapes, shadows, the occasional glint of metal. "I'm going in," she said. Lucien lowered the binoculars. "What?" The plan was to upload the ledger during the deal, to catch everyone in the act, but a remote upload doesn't have the same impact as walking into that room with the ledger in my hands and streaming the entire meeting to 137 simultaneous recipients while Mateo watches. That's not a plan. That's a death wish. It's leverage. Mateo doesn't know the servers are active. He doesn't know about the distribution network. If I walk in offering to trade the ledger for safe passage, he'll think he's winning. He'll let his guard down. He'll talk. And everything he says gets broadcast in real time to every federal prosecutor and journalist my father ever identified. And if he shoots you instead of talking, then the upload triggers automatically. Arden built a dead man switch. If I don't enter a code every 15 minutes, the system uploads everything on its own. Lucien stared at her. Rain had started again. Light, persistent, the kind that gets into your bones, and droplets collected on his shoulders and in his hair, and on the surface of the binoculars still gripped in his right hand. "You planned this," he said. "I've had 18 hours with nothing to do but plan. This isn't what we agreed to. We agreed to burn it down. This is how it burns fastest. Sienna, he will kill you. Then come get me before he does." She opened the vehicle door. The cold hit her like a wall, river wind carrying diesel and rain and the metallic tang of the Hudson. She stepped out onto the wet concrete and slung the messenger bag across her chest and looked back at Lucien one more time through the open door. I was rigid in the back seat, every muscle in his body locked. His hands gripped the edge of the seat with a force that was turning his knuckles bone white, and his face was doing something she'd never seen, cracking open along fault lines he'd spent a lifetime sealing shut, revealing underneath a terror so raw and so total that it made him look, for just 1 second, like the 20-year-old kid he'd been before the Empire, before the violence, before any of this. 15 minutes, she said. Then you come in. 10. 12. Sienna. 12 minutes, Lucien. Give me 12 minutes to get him talking, then bring everything you have. She closed the door, walked across the wet concrete toward the warehouse. The floodlights turned the rain into silver needles falling all around her. Her boots splashed through puddles that reflected the harsh white light back up at her like broken mirrors. The messenger bag bounced gently against her hip with each step. Inside it, the ledger rode heavy and warm, and she could feel its weight like a second heartbeat, steady, insistent, counting down. She reached the warehouse door. Two of Mateo's men stepped forward, tactical gear, automatic weapons, faces that had been wiped clean of anything resembling hesitation. I'm here to see Matteo Corsini, Sienna said. Tell him Sienna Vale is here, and tell him I brought what he's been looking for. One of the men spoke into a radio. A crackle, a response. Then the massive sliding door groaned wider and wider, and the yellow light from inside spilled out onto the dock like something bleeding. And Sienna Vale, 24 years old, orphaned, hunted, carrying the truth about her mother's murder in a bag across her chest, walked into the mouth of the beast. The warehouse interior was enormous. Concrete floor, steel beams, stacked shipping containers forming walls within walls, creating a maze of corridors and open spaces that smelled like oil and salt water and money. In the center, beneath a cluster of industrial pendant lights, a long table had been set up. Maps, laptops, metal briefcases, and around it men, 15, maybe 20, in various configurations of expensive suits and tactical equipment, the strange hybrid aesthetic of organized crime at its highest level, where the line between businessman and soldier doesn't exist. Matteo Corsini stood at the head of the table. It was not what she expected. Shorter than Lucian, leaner, a narrow face with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that moved constantly, scanning, calculating, processing information at a speed that was almost visible. He wore a navy suit, no tie, a gold watch that caught the light every time his wrist moved. He was 51 years old and looked 40, and when he smiled at Sienna as she walked toward him through the warehouse, the smile didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. The Vale girl, he said. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. The voice of a man who had spent decades learning to make terrible things sound reasonable. I was wondering when you'd show up. Wondering or waiting? Both. His eyes dropped to the messenger bag. Is that it? This is it? May I? First we talk. Matteo's smile widened. Around the table men shifted. Hands moved toward holsters. The temperature in the room dropped by degrees that had nothing to do with climate. Talk, Matteo said. By all means. Sienna's hand was inside the messenger bag. Her fingers found the ledger's spine. Her thumb found the edge of the phone Arden had given her. The one currently streaming everything through a signal booster mounted on the messenger bag's strap, broadcasting to 137 encrypted endpoints across the world. 11 minutes and 40 seconds remaining before Lucian's men came through the walls. You killed my mother, Sienna said. The warehouse went quiet. Not silent. You could still hear the rain on the metal roof, the hum of generators, the distant moan of a cargo ship on the river. But the human sound stopped. Breathing, shuffling, the clink of metal. All of it paused. Matteo tilted his head. That's a bold claim. It's not a claim. It's documented. Page 114. Your initials. Your payment. Your detective at the 71st Precinct. $85,000 through a shell company in the Caymans. My mother's name was Elena. She was 31. And you had her shot on Atlantic Avenue so you could start a war inside the organization and position yourself to take power. Matteo's smile faded, slowly, like a light dimming. Your father told you that, he said. My father wrote it down, 20 years ago, every detail, every transaction, every name. And yet he never said a word to Lucian. Because he knew what Lucian would do. Yes. Matteo took a step toward her. One step, measured, predatory. He knew Lucian would try to kill me, and he knew I would kill Lucian first. Your father was a smart man, Sienna, smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He understood balance. He understood that some truths are too expensive to spend, so you admit it. Matteo looked at her with those dark, calculating eyes. He was doing the math. She could see it. The assessment, the risk calculation, the determination of how much truth to offer and how much to withhold. Then something shifted in his expression. A decision made. Your mother was collateral damage and a necessary restructuring, he said. I regret the method, but the result was essential. Vincent was becoming a liability. His loyalty to Lucian was blinding him to the organization's real potential. Elena's death destabilized him enough to remove him from the decision-making process without triggering a direct confrontation. It was surgical. Sienna's vision tunneled. The edges of the warehouse went dark. The lights overhead seemed to pulse. She heard her own heartbeat, loud, steady, impossibly calm for a woman standing 10 feet from the man who had just described her mother's murder as surgical. Surgical, she repeated. Business, Matteo corrected. 7 minutes remaining. And my father? The hospital? The power outage? Matteo's expression didn't change. Vincent was a dying man telling dangerous stories to his emotional daughter. Another necessary adjustment. The words hit her like physical blows. Each one landed in her chest and detonated, and she could feel the shrapnel, rage, grief, disgust, spreading through her bloodstream like poison. Her hands shook inside the bag. Her teeth pressed together so hard her jaw ached. But she kept talking. Because every word out of Matteo's mouth was being captured, encrypted, and transmitted to 137 endpoints around the world. Every confession, every justification, every casual admission of murder, delivered in the reasonable tone of a man discussing quarterly projections. And Lucien, she asked, what was your plan for him? Lucien outlived his usefulness 10 years ago. He got sentimental, started funding children's programs and community projects, like he could wash the blood off his hands with charity. Tonight's deal was supposed to be his exit, a transaction large enough to justify his removal from the organization's leadership. By morning, Lucien Moretti was going to be either arrested or dead, and I would have had everything. 4 minutes. You seem very comfortable sharing all of this, Sienna said. Matteo smiled again. This time it reached his eyes, and what she saw there made her blood go cold. Because you're not leaving this warehouse, Sienna. He took another step forward. Did you think I didn't know? The phone in your bag, the signal booster on your strap. My people detected the transmission 2 minutes after you walked in. The room shifted, men moved, weapons appeared, not drawn from holsters but produced from beneath jackets and behind containers, a choreographed reveal that told her this had been anticipated, planned. She was standing in the center of a trap that had been set before she arrived. The signal's already been jammed, Matteo said. Your stream went dark 90 seconds ago. Whatever you've transmitted, if anything, it's fragmentary at best, useless in court. And the ledger, he extended his hand, the ledger is going to come with me. Sienna's chest seized. Her eyes flicked to the phone screen inside the bag. The transmission indicator was red, dead, jammed, 90 seconds. She'd been broadcasting for 10 minutes and 20 seconds before the signal died. 10 minutes of Matteo's confession, fragmented, incomplete. Maybe enough, maybe not. 2 minutes until Lucian's men hit the building. Matteo stepped closer, his hand closed around her wrist, tight, grinding the bones together. And he pulled her toward him with a strength that didn't match his lean frame. Give me the bag, he said. The first explosion hit the north wall of the warehouse like the fist of something enormous. Steel shrieked, concrete crumbled. A shockwave of dust and debris rolled through the interior, knocking men off their feet and sending the industrial pendant lights swinging wildly, casting insane shadows across the chaos. Lucian hadn't waited 12 minutes. He'd waited 10. The second explosion took out the dockside doors. Then gunfire. Not scattered, not random, but disciplined, concentrated, pouring through the breaches in the walls in controlled bursts that turned the warehouse into a killing floor. Lucian's men came through the smoke like phantoms, dark shapes moving in tactical formation, clearing corners, dropping Matteo's guards with the efficient brutality of professionals who'd been doing this their entire lives. Matteo's grip on Sienna's wrist released. He stumbled backward, drew a weapon from his waistband. His face had changed, the smooth, calculated mask cracking to reveal something underneath that was all animal, cornered, desperate, dangerous. Get her out of here, he screamed at his men. Get the ledger. But his men were dying. The warehouse had become a war zone, muzzle flashes strobing through the dust, bullets punching through steel containers with sounds like anvils being struck, men screaming and falling and crawling across concrete slick with water and something darker. Sienna ran. She ripped free of the chaos and sprinted toward the back of the warehouse, the messenger bag slamming against her hip, her boots sliding on wet concrete. Behind her, she heard Mateo screaming orders that were being swallowed by gunfire and explosions, and the terrible grinding collapse of steel infrastructure. She burst through a side door onto an exterior platform, a suspended loading dock that extended out over the river on steel girders, 20 feet above the black churning water of the Hudson. Rain hammered down. Floodlights from the dock turned the rain into a wall of white static. Helicopters, she didn't know whose, circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness in sweeping arcs. She was halfway across the platform when the door behind her slammed open. Mateo stepped out, gun raised, blood on his face from a cut above his eye. His suit was torn. His breathing was ragged, but his hand was steady and his aim was locked directly on the center of her back. "Stop," he said. She stopped. The platform swayed beneath them, a gentle, sickening motion caused by the wind and the stress on the aging steel cables that held it suspended above the water. Rain pounded the metal grating beneath her feet. She could see the river through the gaps, black, moving, impossibly cold. "Turn around," Mateo said. She turned. He stood 15 feet away, gun aimed at her chest. Behind him, the warehouse was burning, flames climbing the interior walls, casting orange light through the shattered door, smoke pouring into the rain-filled sky. "The bag," he said. "Now." "It's over, Mateo. Whatever you jammed, you didn't jam fast enough. 10 minutes of your confession is sitting on servers in 17 countries right now. Then 10 minutes is all they'll have. Because the original," he gestured at the bag with the gun, is going into that river, along with you." He took a step forward. The platform door crashed open a second time. Lucian came through it like something unleashed, bloodied, breathing hard, a cut across his left cheek and his shirt torn open at the shoulder where a blade had found him. His gun was gone. Lost in the warehouse. His hands were empty and covered in blood that wasn't all his own. He stopped. Saw Mateo. Saw the gun aimed at Sienna. Saw the 20 feet of swaying steel platform separating him from the man who had murdered Elena Vale and spent 2 decades pretending to be his brother. "Lucien," Mateo said. The gun didn't waver from Sienna. "Right on time." "Put it down, Mateo." "You know I can't do that." "Put the gun down and we walk out of here." "Walk where? Into handcuffs? Into a courtroom? You and I both know that's not how this ends." Mateo's voice cracked. Just slightly. The smooth, calculating veneer finally fracturing under the weight of everything collapsing around him. "I built this. Not you. I held this organization together while you were visiting orphanages and falling in love with a dead man's daughter. I did the work. I made the sacrifices. And you were always too weak to do what needed to be done. You killed Elena." The words left Lucian's mouth in a voice Sienna had never heard. Quiet, broken, and loaded with a fury so deep it didn't sound like anger at all. It sounded like grief that had fossilized into something harder than stone. "You killed Elena, and you let me mourn her like it was fate. You sat across from me, and you watched me fall apart, and you used my grief to take more power. 20 years, Mateo. 20 years I trusted you. And I made you rich. You made me a ghost." Mateo's aim shifted, from Sienna to Lucien, back to Sienna. The gun trembled. The rain intensified. The platform groaned beneath them, cables straining against wind and weight, and the slow, inevitable physics of structures that were never meant to hold this much. "One of you is going into that river," Mateo said. "Choose." Lucien moved, not toward cover, not away, toward Mateo, straight at the barrel of the gun, with nothing in his hands and nothing in his expression except the absolute, terrifying certainty of a man who has finally stopped caring whether he survives. Mateo fired. The bullet tore through the air an inch past Lucian's ribs. So close Sienna saw his shirt fabric ripple, and Lucien hit him at full speed, driving his shoulder into Mateo's chest, and both men crashed onto the metal grating in a tangle of fists and blood and rain. The platform screamed beneath them. Cables snapped. One end dropped 6 inches with a metallic shriek that cut through the noise of the storm and the helicopters and the distant gunfire still echoing from the burning warehouse. Sienna grabbed the railing. The platform tilted. Mateo and Lucien rolled across the wet grating, fighting for the gun, fighting for leverage, fighting for something more fundamental than either, fighting for the right to be the last one standing when this was over. A knee to the ribs, an elbow to the jaw. Lucian's hand found Mateo's wrist and slammed it against the grating once, twice, 3 times, and the gun skittered free and slid across the wet metal toward the edge of the platform, toward the darkness, toward the river 20 feet below. Mateo headbutted Lucian, a crack of bone on bone that Sienna felt in her own skull. Lucian staggered. Blood poured from his nose. Mateo rolled on top of him, hands around his throat, squeezing with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left except the ability to destroy. Lucian's face went red, then purple. His hands clawed at Mateo's wrists. His legs kicked against the grating. The platform tilted further. Another cable snapped with a sound like a gunshot, and the entire structure lurched sideways. And Sienna slid 3 feet toward the edge before catching herself on a support beam. The gun. It had stopped against a raised bolt in the grating, 8 feet from where she gripped the beam. She could see it, black metal shining in the floodlight, rain pooling around it, vibrating with the platform's death tremors. She let go of the beam, crawled across the tilting, shaking grating on her hands and knees. The metal bit into her bandaged palms. Pain shot through her wrists. The river was visible through every gap in the floor. Black water churning, waiting, hungry. Her fingers closed around the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold, wet. The grip was slick with rain and someone's blood and her own sweat, and she wrapped both hands around it the way her father had taught her when she was 16. A lesson she'd hated him for then and was grateful for now. She stood up on the tilting platform, rain hammering her face, wind pulling at her hair, the warehouse burning behind her, helicopters circling above. And in front of her, on the buckling grating, Matteo Corsini was strangling the life out of Lucian Moretti. Lucian's eyes found hers, bloodshot, dimming. His mouth was open, trying to breathe, failing. His hands were losing their grip on Matteo's wrists. His body was going slack. Sienna aimed. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. Rain or tears. She couldn't tell which, and it didn't matter. She fired once. The sound was enormous. It filled the world. The recoil jolted through her arms and into her shoulders and down her spine, and the bullet hit Matteo Corsini in the center of his chest, and his hands released Lucian's throat, and his body arched backward, and the expression on his face was not pain, not surprise, but something that looked almost like recognition, the final, fleeting understanding of a man who had always known, on some level, that this was how it would end. He fell sideways, off the platform, into the black water below. The splash was swallowed by the storm. Then the platform gave way. The last cable snapped and the entire structure dropped. Not all at once, but in stages, one end plunging while the other held for one agonizing second before releasing two, and suddenly there was nothing beneath Sienna's feet except gravity and darkness, and the freezing promise of the Hudson River rushing up to meet her. Her hand shot out, caught a cable. The jolt nearly ripped her arm from its socket. She screamed, a raw, animal sound torn from somewhere below language, and her body slammed against the remaining fragment of the platform that still hung from the dock like a broken limb. Below her, Lucian dangled from the edge of the same fragment, one hand gripping a support strut, his face turned up toward her through the rain, blood and water running down his skin, his eyes barely open. His grip was slipping. She reached down, grabbed his wrist with the hand that wasn't clutching the cable. His skin was slick, cold. Her bandaged palm screamed as the wound underneath tore open. "Hold on," she gasped. "Can't. Hold on." His fingers were loosening. She could feel it. The slow, terrible relaxation of a body that had reached its limit. His eyes were on hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not surrender, gratitude. The quiet, devastating gratitude of a man who had finally found something worth dying for and was at peace with the cost. "Don't you dare!" Sienna hissed through clenched teeth. "Don't you dare let go!" She pulled, every muscle in her body screaming, her shoulder joint grinding, the cable cutting into her palm. Rain pouring down her face, into her eyes, into her open mouth. She pulled, and Lucian held on. And for one suspended, eternal moment, hanging above the black river with a burning warehouse behind them, and helicopters above, and the body of a dead man sinking into the current below. They held each other between falling and surviving, and neither of them let go. Her shoulder dislocated first. She felt it go, a wet, grinding pop that sent white lightning from her left arm straight into the center of her brain, and her vision went black for half a second, maybe a full second. And in that darkness, the only thing that existed was the feeling of Lucian's wrist inside her grip, and the absolute non-negotiable refusal to open her hand. The cable above her was cutting through the bandage on her right palm. She could feel the steel braid chewing into the raw skin beneath, could feel warm blood running down her forearm and mixing with the rain, and the pain was so total and so constant that it had stopped being pain and had become something else. A frequency, a pitch, a single sustained note that her entire nervous system was screaming at a volume that drowned out everything except the fundamental mechanics of holding on. Below her, Lucian's body swung in the wind. His face was turned up toward her, gray eyes open, blood-streaked, rain hammering his skin. His left hand gripped her wrist. His right hand had found a bolt on the platform fragment and was holding on with fingers that she could see whitening even through the darkness and the rain and the 20 feet of churning black water beneath them. Sienna. His voice was barely audible over the storm. Hoarse. Stripped of everything except the raw physical effort of pushing air through a throat that Mateo's hands had nearly crushed. Your arm. Shut up. Your arm is dislocated. You can't hold both. I said shut up. She pulled. The movement sent a shockwave of agony through her left shoulder that made her teeth clamp together so hard she tasted blood from the inside of her cheek. Lucian's body rose 6 inches. 8. She wedged her knee against a crossbeam and used the leverage to haul him higher, and Lucian's right hand released the bolt and found the edge of the platform fragment, and his fingers dug into the metal grating, and he pulled himself up with the desperate, shaking strength of a man climbing out of his own grave. He got one elbow over the edge, then the other, then his chest, his waist, his legs, and he rolled onto the fragment beside her, both of them lying face up on the buckled metal grating, suspended 30 feet above the river, staring at a sky that was nothing but rain and searchlight beams and helicopter rotors chopping the darkness into spinning fragments. They lay there breathing, just breathing. The sound of it, ragged, wet, labored, was louder than the storm. Can you move? Lucian asked. Can you? I'm asking you first. Sienna turned her head, looked at him. His face was a wreck. The cut on his cheek had opened wider. His nose was swollen and canted slightly to the left where Mateo had headbutted him, and the bruising around his throat was already darkening to something that looked like a painting of a storm. But his eyes were open, clear, alive. My shoulder's out, she said. I know. I heard it go. That's disgusting. Yeah, a sound escaped her mouth that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. She pressed her good hand against her face, and the sound came again, and then again, and she lay on the broken platform above the river, laughing and crying simultaneously, while helicopters circled above, and the warehouse burned on the shore, and somewhere below them the current carried Matteo Corsini's body toward the open sea. Lucian's hand found hers, closed around it. Not tight, gently, the way you hold something you've just saved from breaking, unsure whether it's intact or merely holding its shape. We need to get off this thing, he said. Agreed. Getting off the platform took 7 minutes that felt like 7 years. The fragment was hanging at a 40-degree angle from 2 remaining cables attached to the dock's edge, and Lucian went first, climbing the tilted grating hand over hand, testing each grip before committing his weight, moving with the slow, methodical patience of a man who understood that one wrong move meant the river. When he reached the dock, he turned and reached down for Sienna, and she climbed with one working arm and 2 burning hands, and a determination that had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with the simple biological refusal to die on a piece of scrap metal above the Hudson. His hand caught hers at the top. He pulled her onto the dock. She collapsed on the wet concrete. He collapsed beside her. For 30 seconds, they didn't move. Then Lucian's earpiece crackled, a voice, Dante's, cutting through static. Boss? Warehouse is secured. 14 of Mateo's men in custody. 4 dead. Feds are inbound. Real ones, not his. ETA 12 minutes. Lucian pressed the earpiece. Mateo's people on the north dock. The federal contacts. Scattered. 2 vehicles fled east. 1 was intercepted at the bridge. We're tracking the other. And the server? The upload? A pause. Then Arden's voice, cutting in on the same channel. The transmission was jammed at 10 minutes 20 seconds. But the dead man switch triggered when the signal dropped. Full upload completed through the backup satellite relay 9 minutes ago. All 137 endpoints received. The ledger is live. Sienna closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against the wet concrete. The rain hit the back of her neck and ran down her spine, and she felt it, really felt it, cold and clean and alive on her skin. and for the first time in what seemed like weeks, the weight on her chest loosened by a fraction of a degree. It was done. Her father's fail-safe had worked. 20 years of hidden truth, broadcast simultaneously to every corner of the justice system and the media landscape that the Ledger's corruption hadn't reached. Mateo's network, his bought judges, his paid federal agents, his political connections, all of it, exposed, documented, irrevocable. And Lucian, she opened her eyes, looked at him. He was lying on his back on the dock, rain falling on his face, his chest rising and falling with the slow, heavy rhythm of a man who had just watched his life's work become evidence. "It's all out there now," she said. "I know. Everything, your name, your operation, all of it. I know." "Lucienne, I know, Sienna." He turned his head, looked at her with those gray eyes that were somehow still steady, still clear, even now, even lying on a dock with blood on his face and his empire dissolving in real time across 137 screens around the world. "I knew the moment I said yes in that kitchen. I knew what it meant. Sirens. Distant but growing. The real federal response. Not Mateo's corrupted assets, but the actual machinery of law enforcement, triggered by 137 simultaneous data dumps that had turned every newsroom and prosecutor's office in the country into a war zone of their own." Lucien sat up, slowly. His body moved the way buildings move after earthquakes, carefully, testing its own integrity, unsure which parts were still structurally sound. He looked at the burning warehouse, at the scattered debris, at the dark water below the dock where the platform had fallen and where Matteo Corsini had disappeared. 12 minutes, he said. "What?" "Dante said the feds are 12 minutes out. That's how long I have." "How long you have for what?" He stood, offered her his hand. She took it, his right hand in her right, the one that wasn't attached to a dislocated shoulder. And he pulled her up with a gentleness that contradicted everything about the violence still echoing around them. "For this," he said. He put his hands on her shoulder, one on the joint, one on her upper arm, and before she could process what was happening, he pushed and rotated with a quick, precise motion that sent a white-hot bolt of pain through her body, and then, click. The joint slid back into place, and the agony dropped from a 10 to a 5, and she gasped and grabbed the front of his ruined shirt with both hands. "A warning," she panted. "A warning would have been nice. Warnings give you time to tense up, makes it worse. I hate you." "You don't." She didn't. And the fact that she didn't, the fact that she was standing on a burning dock with a relocated shoulder and blood on her hands, and the taste of smoke on her tongue, looking up at a man whose life was now measured in the 12 minutes before handcuffs arrived, and feeling something so fierce and so complicated that no single word in any language could contain it. That fact was the truest thing she'd ever known about herself. Lucian's hands were still on her shoulder. His thumbs rested against her collarbone. His face was close enough that she could see the rain collecting in the hollow of his throat, could count the cuts on his jaw, could trace the exact line where the bruising on his neck shifted from purple to black. 10 minutes, he said. "What do you want to do with 10 minutes? Stand here." "Just stand here? I've spent 20 years moving, running operations, managing people, building things that were already rotting from the inside." His voice was quiet. Not weak. The opposite. The kind of quiet that comes from a place so deep it doesn't need volume. "I want to stand here, with you, on this dock, in this rain, for as long as I'm allowed." Sienna's throat closed. She swallowed against it. The rain hammered down and the sirens grew closer, and the warehouse crackled and hissed behind them, and she stood there with his hands on her shoulders and the ruins of everything around them, and she let the minutes pass. 8 minutes. 5. 3. The blue and red lights appeared on the access road leading to the terminal. A convoy. Federal vehicles, NYPD support, the whole grinding apparatus of a system that had just been handed the biggest corruption case in a generation and was responding with every resource it had. Lucian dropped his hands from her shoulders. "Go," he said. "What?" "Go, now, before they see you with me." "I'm not leaving." "You're the witness, Sienna. The ledger was Vincent's. The upload was yours. If they process you as my associate instead of the whistleblower, everything changes. The narrative shifts. Mateo's people will use it. They'll say you were compromised, that the evidence was manufactured by a rival faction. I don't care. I care." His eyes held hers, fierce, final. "This is the last thing I can do for you." Let me do it. Walk away. Find Arden. She'll get you to a safe location. When the prosecutors come, and they will, you tell them everything. The truth. All of it. Including me. Lucien, including me. He stepped back. One step. The distance between them felt like a canyon opening in the concrete. Don't protect me. Don't soften it. Don't edit the story to make me something I'm not. I built this empire. I made the choices. The ledger is accurate. And whatever comes next, prison, trial, whatever, I face it knowing that for once in my entire life I did the right thing for the right reason. The first federal vehicles were pulling through the terminal gate. Lights flashing. Sirens cutting off one by one as they entered the complex. The controlled, deliberate approach of agencies that knew exactly what they were walking into and wanted everyone inside to know they were coming. I'll find you, Sienna said. After. Whatever happens, I'll find you. I know you will. The ghost of a smile. The real one. The one she'd been looking for since the first night in the club. You always did have your mother's stubbornness. This time, the mention of her mother didn't hurt. It landed in her chest like a warm stone. Heavy, real, solid. Go, he said. She went. She crossed the terminal yard at a half run, her left arm pressed against her ribs to stabilize the shoulder, the messenger bag still strapped across her chest. She found Arden waiting in a vehicle 2 blocks east, engine running, lights off, the back door already open. Sienna climbed in. The door closed. The car moved. Through the rear window, she watched the federal convoy converge on the burning warehouse. She watched dark figures pour from vehicles with weapons drawn. She watched the floodlights intensify until the entire terminal was lit up like noon on the surface of an alien planet. She did not see Lucien, but she knew, with the same certainty she'd felt when she pulled him off that platform, with the same stubbornness he'd credited to her mother, that this was not the end. 6 weeks later. The world had changed, or at least the part of it that ran on backroom deals and buried ledgers had changed so fundamentally that the people who'd built their lives on its stability were still trying to figure out which way was up. The federal raids began 48 hours after the terminal. Not one raid, dozens, simultaneous, coordinated across 3 states and 11 federal jurisdictions. Matteo Corsini's network unraveled like a cheap suit in a rainstorm. Judges were removed from benches. Detectives were arrested in their own precincts. 3 sitting members of Congress announced sudden retirements that fooled nobody. A cartel financier with ties to 4 foreign governments was pulled off a private jet at Teterboro, and Perp walked past a wall of cameras that broadcast his face to every screen in America. Matteo's body was recovered from the Hudson 11 days after the terminal battle. Cause of death: a single gunshot wound to the chest. The current had carried him 4 miles downriver. The tabloids ran the photo. Sienna didn't look at it. Lucien Moretti surrendered to federal authorities the morning after the terminal. He walked into the FBI's Lower Manhattan field office at 7:14 a.m. in a clean suit, borrowed, not his, with his lawyer beside him and his hands at his sides, and no expression on his face that any camera could read. The footage played on every news channel for 3 days straight. Pundits and experts and retired prosecutors debated his case on split screens. Some called him a crime lord getting what he deserved. Others pointed to the fact that he'd orchestrated the destruction of his own empire and asked whether that counted for something. Sienna told the truth, all of it, including Lucien, just like he'd asked. She sat in a federal prosecutor's office for 9 hours on a Tuesday and laid out everything: the ledger, the servers, the terminal, the upload, the jam, the dead man switch. She explained Matteo's confession. She described the attempted abduction in the parking garage. She documented the staged power outage that killed her father. She answered every question with a precision that surprised even her, drawing on a memory sharpened by grief and adrenaline and the particular clarity that comes from having survived something that should have killed you. She did not minimize Lucien's role. She did not exaggerate it either. She described what he'd built and what he'd destroyed and the reason he'd destroyed it. And when the prosecutor asked whether she believed Lucien Moretti had prior knowledge of Elena Vale's murder, she said no. And when the prosecutor asked whether she had evidence to support that belief, she opened the ledger to page 114 and pointed to the lines that documented Matteo's operation and said, "The evidence supports it. My father spent 20 years making sure it would." The case moved fast, faster than anyone expected. The sheer volume of the ledger's data, combined with Matteo's recorded confession, fragmentary though it was, created an evidentiary avalanche that buried defense motions and procedural delays under its own weight. Plea deals cascaded through the system. Lower-level operatives flipped on higher-level ones. The architecture of corruption that had taken decades to build collapsed in weeks. Lucien's trial was set, then postponed, then restructured when his legal team presented evidence of his cooperation. The terminal operation, the voluntary surrender, the deliberate dissolution of his own empire. The prosecutors fought. The defense pushed back. Legal scholars wrote op-eds. The case became a referendum on whether a man who had done terrible things could be credited for choosing, at the end, to do one right thing at enormous personal cost. Sienna didn't follow the coverage. She couldn't. Every headline with his name in it opened a door in her chest that she wasn't ready to walk through, so she kept it closed and focused on the things she could control, which, as it turned out, were very few. She buried her father on a Thursday in late November. A small plot in a cemetery in Red Hook, 3 blocks from the apartment where she'd grown up, within sight of the waterfront where Vincent Vale had spent his youth working the docks before the life found him, or he found it. The ceremony was short. A handful of people attended, 2 of Vincent's old union contacts who'd been brave enough or foolish enough to show their faces, a bartender from the East Village who'd become something close to a friend over the past year, and Arden, who stood at the back in a dark coat and said nothing. Sienna stood at the graveside with her hands in her pockets and her left shoulder still aching from the dislocation, and looked down at the freshly turned earth and tried to find something to say to a man who had lied to her for 20 years and protected her for just as long. She settled on, "I read it, all of it, and I'm still here." That was enough. It had to be. The weeks that followed were strange and shapeless. Sienna moved out of the penthouse, federal property now, seized along with everything else Lucien had owned, and into a 1-bedroom apartment in Red Hook. Not the old building, a different one, 3 streets over, with windows that locked and a radiator that worked. She went back to bartending, took double shifts, came home tired enough to sleep most nights, which was a mercy she didn't take for granted. She didn't hear from Lucien, not directly. His lawyer called once, 6 weeks into the pre-trial proceedings, to inform her that Lucien had asked for nothing. No character testimony, no public support, no communication. He wanted her clean, untangled from his case, free to build whatever came next without his wreckage dragging behind her. She hung up the phone and sat on her kitchen floor for 45 minutes staring at the wall. Then she got up and went to work. It was autumn when it ended. Real autumn, the kind that New York does better than anywhere, when the light turns gold and the air gets sharp, and the whole city seems to exhale after the long, brutal grind of summer. The kind of autumn that makes you believe, despite all evidence, that things can change. Sienna heard about it on the radio at the bar. A plea agreement. Federal prosecutors had accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for Lucien's full cooperation and testimony against every remaining element of Mateo's network. Time served. 5 years of supervised release, full forfeiture of assets. A lifetime ban from financial transactions, exceeding a threshold that meant, in practical terms, he would never again be the man he'd been. He walked out of federal custody on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The cameras were there, the reporters, the noise. But the footage showed a man who didn't look at any of them, who walked through the crowd with his eyes forward and his hands in the pockets of a jacket that didn't fit quite right, and got into a car that wasn't armored and drove away from a courthouse that would never see him again. Sienna watched the footage once, on her phone, in the back room of the bar, during a break she hadn't asked for but took anyway. Then she went back to work. 3 weeks later, she found him. She wasn't looking. Or maybe she was. Maybe she'd been looking since the night on the dock, since the moment she'd watched the federal vehicles swallow the terminal and driven away in Arden's car, with the taste of smoke still in her mouth. Maybe every walk she'd taken through Red Hook since then, every Sunday morning, every Tuesday evening, every aimless circuit through streets she knew by heart, had been a search disguised as a routine. The gym was on Van Brunt Street, a narrow building wedged between a laundromat and a bodega, with a faded sign above the door that read, "Vale's Boxing," in letters so old they were nearly invisible. It had been closed for a decade, longer. The windows had been boarded up since Sienna was in high school, and the inside had become a legend of the neighborhood. The place where Vincent Vale had trained as a teenager, where he'd learned to fight before he learned to steal, where the only rules were keep your hands up and don't quit. The boards were off the windows now. The front door was propped open, and from somewhere inside came the sound of a hammer striking wood. Slow, rhythmic, patient. The sound of someone building something. Sienna stood on the sidewalk. The autumn sun was low, that particular October angle that turns everything it touches into gold and copper and something that looks like forgiveness if you're in the right frame of mind. It spilled through the gym's open door and cast a long rectangle of warm light across the cracked sidewalk at her feet. She walked in. The gym was gutted. Stripped to studs and exposed brick and bare concrete, sawdust covered the floor. Tools were scattered across a makeshift workbench, saws, drills, boxes of nails. A new heavy bag hung from a ceiling beam that had been reinforced with fresh lumber. The air smelled like sawdust and sweat and something clean, paint, maybe, or wood stain. Lucien was in the center of the room. I was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and work jeans and boots with sawdust caked on the soles, and he was sanding a piece of wood that would eventually become part of a boxing ring platform. His sleeves were pushed to his elbows. His forearms were dusty. The cut on his cheek had healed into a thin white line. The bruising on his throat was gone. He looked thinner, older, not aged, refined, as if the last several weeks had burned away everything inessential and left behind only the core of the man, stripped of the empire, and the suits and the reputation and the armor of a life built on violence. No guards, no weapons, no armored convoys, just a man in a gym with sawdust on his hands and faded sunlight in his hair. He looked up when she walked in. Their eyes met across 30 feet of bare concrete and settling dust, and the silence between them was not the charged, dangerous silence of the penthouse kitchen or the burning dock or the swaying platform above the river. It was something else, something quieter. The silence of two people standing in the wreckage of everything they'd been through and realizing that the wreckage was behind them. "You're rebuilding it," she said, trying. She walked closer, ran her hand along the workbench, picked up a nail, put it down, looked at the heavy bag, looked at the walls, looked at the light coming through windows that hadn't been uncovered in a decade. "My father used to talk about this place," she said, "when I was little, before everything. He said it was the only place he ever felt honest." Lucien set down the sandpaper, straightened up. His hands hung at his sides, dusty, calloused in new places, the hands of a man who was learning to build things that didn't require anyone's destruction. "I was right," Lucien said. "I came here once when I was 19, before any of it started. Your father brought me, taught me to throw a jab." He looked around the room, at the bare walls, the exposed beams, the morning light. "I forgot what that felt like, building something that doesn't hurt anyone." Sienna leaned against the workbench, crossed her arms, carefully, the left shoulder still carrying a ghost of the dislocation that would probably never fully leave. She studied him. Not the way she'd studied him that first night in the club. Not as a target, not as a threat, not as a complication. She studied him the way you study a landscape after a fire, looking for green, looking for proof that things grow back. "The plea deal," she said. "I heard about it." "Yeah, 5 years supervised release." "Yeah. No empire, no money, no organization." "No." He almost smiled, almost. "Just this. Sawdust and sore knees in a building that needs more work than one person can do. Good thing you're not one person." The words left her mouth before she'd fully decided to say them, and they hung in the dusty air between them like something offered. Not a promise, not a commitment, but an opening. A door left unlocked. An invitation that didn't require an answer right now or ever, but was there, available, waiting for whenever he was ready to walk through it. Lucien looked at her. The afternoon light caught his eyes and turned the gray into something warmer. Not warm exactly, but warming. Thawing. A frozen lake showing its first crack of spring. "I spent 20 years believing violence was the only way to protect the people I loved," he said. "Your father, your mother, you. I thought if I was strong enough, ruthless enough, controlled enough, I could keep everyone safe. And instead, I built the machine that Matteo used to destroy every single person I cared about." His voice was steady, quiet. The voice of a man who had done the long, ugly work of looking at himself without flinching and had come out the other side with something that wasn't redemption. Because redemption is too clean a word for what actually happens, but something more useful. Honesty. "Loving you forced me to stop, to look at what I'd built and see it for what it really was. Not protection, just a bigger cage. And I decided I'd rather have nothing and be free of it than have everything and keep being the man who built it. Sienna's eyes burned. She didn't blink, didn't look away. That's the longest speech you've ever given me, she said. It's the only one that mattered. She pushed off the workbench, walked toward him, slowly, each step deliberate, each step covering ground that had taken months and bloodshed and loss, and the particular brutal education of discovering that the people you love are never who you think they are, and loving them anyway is the only brave thing anyone ever does. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the sawdust on his eyelashes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin through the gray t-shirt, close enough to reach out and touch the thin white scar on his cheek, which she did, lightly, the pad of her thumb tracing the line where a knife had found him on the night they'd hidden in the chaos, and he'd kissed her for the first time. You know, she said softly, we still probably shouldn't do this. Lucien looked at her, and for the first time, the very first time, he smiled. Not the ghost of a smile, not the memory of one. A real smile, small and crooked and imperfect, breaking across his face like dawn, breaking across a city that has survived its longest night. Probably not, he said. She kissed him anyway, and the golden autumn light spilled through the unfinished windows around them and fell across the sawdust and the bare walls and the heavy bag and the tools, and the two of them standing in the center of a room that was being rebuilt from nothing. No empire, no weapons, no lies, just the raw, terrifying, extraordinary possibility of starting over. Outside, the city moved on. Taxis honked. A train rattled somewhere underground. A kid on a bicycle rode past the open door and didn't look in. Red Hook was waking up, the way neighborhoods do when the weight that's been pressing down on them for decades is finally, improbably, lifted. And inside the gym, in the silence and the sawdust and the light, two people who had survived everything the world had thrown at them stood together and breathed, just breathed. And for the first time in either of their lives, for the first time since rain and gunfire and ledgers and loss and a platform collapsing over black water and a hand that refused to let go, the war was finally, truly, irreversibly over.